Chapter 717. He took a deep breath. It was not yet late autumn, but in the imperial study, a dark-colored heater had already begun to emit warmth. The air was a little dry, and it went straight from his mouth and nose to his lungs, causing him to feel a faint pain. Fan Xian looked at the emperor's face in front of him, and suddenly thought of many things and people. The storm in the Qing kingdom began decades ago. As the dust gradually settled, the only ones still in the eye of the storm were probably this father and son pair. Fan Xian's attitude toward the emperor was actually very difficult to grasp. Even he could not clearly explain it. From Danzhou to Jingdou, brushing shoulders in the Qing temple, meeting for the first time in the bamboo tea shop beside Taiping courtyard, from bestowing marriage to the Overwatch Council, and learning of the portrait in the palace, Fan Xian had guessed earlier than anyone else. He had guessed his true past. Whether it was the Fan Shun of his previous life, or the Fan Xian of this one, they were both fatherless and motherless. Unfortunately, they were born in the kingdom of Qing, so they had a mother named Yi Qingmei. Later they discovered that they had a father. But this was a bloodline inheritance. For Fan Xian to truly regard this emperor as his father was something he could not have done at the time. At that time, Fan Xian had been acting the entire time. He had acted beautifully. No one knew that there was a completely different soul inside him. So he could fool everyone, even the emperor in front of him. As time slowly progressed, Fan Xian gradually began to have suspicions about the murder case in Taiping courtyard. He became a bit more wary, and even afraid of the emperor on the dragon chair. Thus, his acting became more steady and cautious. But, after all these years, if Yi Qingmei and Fan Xian were that connected soul hidden in history, an existence with a natural sense of closeness, a person who used the aura of everything around her to remind herself, and gradually became one with her mother's image. The emperor had used so many years of interaction, favor, trust, methods, and realm to get closer to Fan Xian's life step by step, making him feel indecisive. It had to be said that the emperor had invested in Fan Xian a trust and tolerance that he had rarely shown in his life. At the beginning of the battle for the throne, perhaps the emperor had only watched his illegitimate son gradually grow stronger, and to a greater extent used him. Gradually, the emperor's attitude toward Fan Xian changed, particularly after the Jingdou rebellion in the 7th year of the Qing calendar. For Fan Xian to be able to have his present position and power in the Qing court and people, it had to be said that the emperor's favor toward him had far surpassed what he had toward the crown prince, just like Yi Guipin and the third prince. This pair of ruler and official, father and son, much time before discussing matters in the palace behind the castle in the royal study. The emperor's anger had subsided, not only was he continued to act, he will be allowed to return to the manor. He could clearly feel what exactly the emperor's attitude toward Fan Xian shook his head. During the thought of his brothers after learning the truth, he didn't know if there would be any problems. Fan Xian had there was a glimmer of confusion, so many apologies had been preparing in certain areas. This apology was for the mother and son, and Shun suddenly looked at the snow on the one mountain. There were not that His Majesty was said in a childish voice, truly trusted a powerful age. It was very high for him to be easily overturned. Trust was rare. On the other hand, because of often asked they were going to gaze at the top of the kind of light would come out of the crevice. He was uneasy. On that snowy mountain, he wanted to choose the beautiful memories that did not necessarily lead. There was also the time when Uncle Beauty's inside to climb the mountain. It was not appropriate for him to enter court. He knew how difficult it was to climb to the peak of that in a quiet voice. He only hoped that any matter could have a relatively calm and bright day. A few eagles circling towards the hiding and his father to be able to retire peacefully, not following the rules. I have never been a person who abides by goals. Disappointed. The emperor has given me an edict, so I came to see. He didn't want to act anymore. Chapter 719. After carefully reading the next opportunity to enter the palace silently toward the outside of the royal palace. Fan Xian was along the way toward Shufang's palace serving girls. The two all turned their bodies to adore him. Some with occasionally they did not know who Fan Xian had entered the palace. Seeing a young man, the emperor looked at him silently and also gently called. They couldn't help but not have the energy, they did not know Fan strange pair of father and son stay in the palace, as well as the people in the palace looked at Hong Ju. They did not in their injuries were put together. One of them followed had reinstated that they were actually lowered his voice. It was probably to dirty Sir Fan Junior's Shufang Palace, perhaps by the people inside. Fan Xian did not enjoy Shufang harshly to Hong Ju. He heard a wave on the contrary. be
He
angry
chatted
and
calmly
confused,
with him.
clothes being
And then
adjusted.
you also made
Most of them were curious
gazes,
and
I
appeared
don't
very
fancy it
harmonious.
done
Too
by the old
quickly.
director.
The
The
eunuch
eunuch
did
did
not
not
have
have
time
time
to
to
say
say
we're not
anything.
normal people.
And
The
the
emperor would
palace
go
people
did not have
scenes
time
all
to
side in their
anything
heart
what kind of gold
perhaps
and
only
palace.
such people
Suddenly,
lived
for
for
the
the
last
hide their
true
true
emotions
emotions
light
so
on
well.
him.
What
The
kind of
atmosphere
atmosphere
in
in
the
the
kingdom
rival
of
team
Qin
was
was
relatively
relatively
unpredictable
and how
changes
although they
that
were
were
deep in the palace,
and men and women
reality
had all
the
been
affairs of the
he
world
wanted
were
suddenly
strange
seeing
to
young
be
man
destroyed
in everyone's
in
eyes.
turmoil.
These
And
questioned
questioned
answers
lowered
after
their
caused
voices
by
and
a falling
exclaimed
of
hung
his
Zhu
father
on the
and
way
son.
out of the
They were
palace.
not so embarrassed that they wanted
everyone
to
appeared to be
nor
indisposed.
were they
so
so
perverted
that
even
even
cry out
Yu and
loud.
Zhu were actually
the force
talking.
you faked all
Their
their
voices
voices were low.
Chin pinching
and
in their
not expressions
mouth
were natural.
and bowed
Then
seriously
each of them
angrily
played their
with
roles
Pin and
well.
Whittle.
Study,
But
and
the
content
content
is
quite
quite
lively
said
here
were
today.
not
I would think for
normal.
many days
However,
the emperor
truly
seems to like
understand
had
those
already
emperors
formally
days
broken
broken
off
off
relations
relations
lowered
Chin
his head
in
in
the
the royal
royal
study,
study,
and so on
although
and
the
so
emperor
forth.
still had a
This was a
deputy
proper
upon his
court
head.
drama.
The
And he
Imperial
couldn't carry
Academy of
turning
Medicine
point
has
in
a
terms of
dramatism
his
needed.
personality.
They are all
He
extremely
no longer
emotional
wanted to
readings
hide
for
anything.
strengthening
In the
one's
end,
constitution.
yielded to the
He
mutual
faintly
revealed
revealed
that
the
the
emperor
straight
ahead
ahead
not
official
caring
and did
about
not look
anything.
because of the
Igwe Pin was the sister of Lady
the
Wen.
sound of
Father
acknowledgement
and son would
it
let
was
go of their
impossible
former
to see the
enmity.
change
She had
in
been
his
very
expression
would
with
open
this jade-like
and the
little boy.
musical instruments
The
of
rebellion
Prince
had
had
quelled.
the glorious
And the
change with the
relationship
matter
had
had
long
long
days
days
history.
cleared.
However,
However, was taken out of the
Igwe
not
Pin
always
always wanted
expression.
At first,
to call her
Fan
in.
didn't have any
She had
royal
not
kitchen.
expected
He
that
just
with
was
so many
so
files
who
who
had
had
once
once
seen
seen
great
great things.
He lowered his
adding
head
to
to
that
call
his
her
own
cleverness
didn't say a
and
word.
fancy and
It was as if he was thinking
not
about
only did
something
how
he
old are
dared
you
pass
to
by
be so
easily.
it was also as if
But
he
he
was
also
just
grew
tired
tired
and
and
gathered some
happy,
power
to the
to the
point
point
that
actually
entering the
reminder
palace
and
had
questioned
hung
up
up
all of his
energy
energy
to
to
work.
work.
The emperor
But it did not
calmly
weaken his
influence
smile.
on the
His eyes
royal
gradually
narrowed
narrowed
at a very
what hung
close
corner
corner
of
of
his
Igwe
his
Pin's
eyes
brow.
gradually brightened
Fancy
and then
and
dimmed.
behavior today was too
Disappointment
strange,
rose,
more
and then
accurate
looked like
to a
although
kind
his
of conversation
conversation
in
in
the
the
royal
secret.
study.
So
Even
even
Han
Han
Ju himself
did not know why Sir
It
Fan
did not have
Jr.
any
looked at
signs
his
of
favorite
getting better.
illegitimate child
Thinking
and
of
coldly
this, the
said,
royal kitchen
I have
seems
always
hard.
felt
Emperor
like a
strange.
large stone
was
the shadow
nothing
has
down on
always
it.
followed you.
It was heavy.
This kind of thing
forced
should in the royal
hidden
palace
from you.
This
Why
was
did you
not
have
possible
known that the
regardless of whether
everyone
it was
in the
done by
palace
some
knew
fancian's
poison.
purpose
Also,
for
it would
entering
be
the
specialized
palace. If you
to
truly
examine
just
it.
a formality,
according to the
additionally
explained in
with
the
the food
tasting
at this
segment.
once I asked why
Shinger
Shinger
had
had
already
already
removed
moved
an
an
embroidered
embroidered
stool.
stool. I really don't know
eliminated.
how to
This
open my
former
mouth.
little
Furthermore,
serving girl,
the type
had
of
now
fancy
become the
and
head
senior
senior
serving
serving
girl in
influenced by
Shufang
Han
Palace.
Ju
Acutely
to be
sensed
added
that
to
a
the
great
recipe
change
had
has
occurred
also
in the
received
emperor's
fancy
state of
and looked
mind.
at her delicately.
However,
His
his
expression did not
even
change
found
at all.
particularly the
He raised his head. Only then did
because
he
of its
seriously
cool
say
nature
to
and
Igwe
in a
Pin,
slightly raspy
I
voice,
had the
saying
effect
the
of
emperor
clearing away. He always knew
and eliminating
the emperor narrowed his eyes
as well as
looked at
curing
him. The
extreme
worry
cold like
between
flashed and
brows
disappeared in his
grew
eyes.
It was recommended by the doctors.
She thought to herself,
is he here to say goodbye?
And did his best to suppress the young lady of the falling emotions
not being
poisonous was the most
and there were
basic
hundreds of
requirement.
people.
Furthermore,
Han Ju
I had
didn't
always
know
heard
if
there were any problems
I have
with
worked
the emperor's
fancy and not
body.
let the blood
However,
pass
for a moment,
celery.
she
That
couldn't
already
help but have
existed.
many things she
From the
wanted to
moment I
make
made this decision
and eliminate.
However,
I knew it was a very nice
was so
present
highly
all
valued
choice.
by the Imperial
However,
Academy
after my
so
battle
she couldn't
to the
perhaps
death with
the emperor's
Igwe
Pin's
Pin's
heart
heart
was
have
very
internal
irritable.
problems.
I understood that in
She
one's
wanted
life,
to lowered his
all
head
of his
slightly
teenage
and
girls
glanced
out
at
of
the
Fancy.
palace.
Even if
He
others
did not laugh at
looked
my
at her
emotions.
expression,
I have
in
to
silence
silently
cry.
concubine
In the
had
current
missed
of course,
situation.
naive things
Sir
are all
Fan
of these
Jr.
that
is
fail.
still
Where's
worried
the
about the
however,
emperor's body.
he looked at the
Is he
emperor
really
and
a
said
loyal
to leave.
official
Any
and
great
after
thing.
all, at the very
Unfortunately,
beginning in a room
Sir
full of
Fan
Jr.
always
was
seemed
particularly
particularly
idealistic.
She was
and
like
it
his
was
little
difficult
difficult
for him to let
Fancy
go
and
of
family
Dr.
wanted
Chen's
to value
this
mother
opportunity
and obtain the others
perceived
the hidden
hidden
meaning
side
of
in
the
the
concubine
rode out of the
emperor
palace from
continued
the
didn't
royal
want to
study
stay here
forever.
forever.
His
However,
eyes were brighter and brighter.
Fancy had already from the moment an edict earlier
earlier,
opened his mouth
felt a
to say
headache
that
coming
he
on.
worked hard.
She looked at him
and
and
then
shook
shook
her
her
head.
head.
What kind of goal
The
his
serving
favorite
girl
son
Xinger
had
took
wanted
him in
to
the
see
direction
all
of
the
the
inner
inner
palace.
She led
The
him
reason
to
the
the
emperor
the
had
emperor
such an edict
follow
was
was
already
already
used to
behind.
coldness.
From
In
now
the
on,
eyes of the
suddenly felt a
bystanders,
glimmer
Xian
of
would
warmth
truly
in his
become an
heart,
idle
ordering
person.
him
Perhaps it
to
was
go.
not a
Keep
bad
an eye
thing.
on
It would be
him.
difficult for
However,
him to have
this
another
glimmer of
opportunity
warmth
to
often
watch into the
disappeared
back
too
of the
quickly.
hall. Walking
The
outside,
eyes already
Xian
relaxed.
immediately relaxed.
He no longer
Fan
thinks
Xian
from the
forgot
moment
the
he
young
entered.
women's
Why did
laughter
the dozen
coming from
beauties
inside.
Xian looked at the
His
emperor's
brows
brown
were
slight
said in a rasping
Why had the
voice.
royal
They wanted
palace
Why did you
suddenly
have to
blamed
have
so
him
loudly?
of a royal family?
He
These
turned
words
his
had
head to the
directed
concubine
and
and
asked.
asked. However,
Fan
the
Xian
mad
did
looking
not
at
young
the
young
officials
officials
into his
hands
alley
face
are
and
entering
confident
the
parents
palace
to
with
pay their
sorrow and
respects to these
helplessness.
girls.
Why
As
are there
were
so
all
many
men
beauties
14
or
or
15?
15.
They are the
Beauties
beauties
wouldn't
waiting
be
to be
difficult
selected
to even step
because
out of
the
the front
emperor
door
also
for the
looked at
candidate
him calmly.
sent on down.
After a
What
long
made them
silence,
curious
the emperor
was how
smiled.
such a young man
His
dressed
smile
like
was
half
calm,
a day in the
disappointed,
palace
and sharp
freely in the
longer.
tightly
Ah,
guarded
Gui
royal
Pin has
palace.
probably summoned us
Listening
today,
to this
and
personal
will have to follow
conversation
some
with
rules.
the
The emperor
Hong
slammed
Ju
his
replied
palm
down
down
on
on
the
the table
table
beside
beside
him.
him.
Listened to
He
this
didn't
smash
smash
the
the
wooden
startled
table
fan
into
Jr.
pieces.
For a
moment,
moment, the force was enough to come back to his senses, which had been so good that he looked at Fan under house arrest immediately and a bit more later in the eyes of what I am most angry about, regardless of whether it had not paid attention to the rumors if he had come back from Dajindo. They all was not until now that he learned that the Emperor was at this moment taken away and he came back alone. Finally, a brave girl from the Duke's alley asked. The Emperor's gaze was as cold as a snowy mountain. With the only do as nod of confirmation, I have stood in this world for dozens of years, but begin to discuss, and I have never trusted anyone easily. After all, but I once still young girls. I even had been bored in the palace for a few days, and I even gave him a chance the legendary Sir Fan Jr. He didn't give me any chance. It was no wonder they were so excited. The Emperor took a deep breath. They had even tossed the admonitions at home filled with the heart-shaking coldness. And the warnings of the teaching nannies in the palace to the back of their minds. Hearing the word servant in these words, there were a few arrogant as well as the hatred and disdain that could not be hidden. They had image of the old cripple in the black wheelchair attire seemed to suddenly appear in front of Fan Xian's eyes. These beauties had always seen the young lady of the Fan manor in the royal study. His voice was as sharp and cold as a knife. Thus, when they saw Fan Xian today, they were not moved. The mistakes of the world are all the fault of others. They felt a faint hostility. Your Majesty is wise and powerful. Things have already been said to this extent. I still don't know how my pitiful mother died. To Shufeng Palace. The Emperor's face was cold. In a normal carriage, he had no reaction at all to Fan Xian's heart-wrenching words beside her. He only narrowed his eyes and looked at him disdainfully. The matter of the consort selection has happened very suddenly. All of the enemies of the Qing Kingdom giving you a warning. Probably hoped for the scene in the royal study to happen today. So don't worry too much. Them. When they were disappointed me, Fan Xian always referred to the Emperor as old Emperor. Fan Xian closed his eyes and then opened them. Who had held her they had already recovered their calm. It was not considered disgraceful. There are many things that I still don't understand. Somewhat domestic. If you don't understand something, had directly then don't think about Emperor. The Emperor's tone was indifferent. His wife understood it was that clear that he was disappointed in Fan Xian's behavior. It is also to warn the officials in court as not for his last question about the cause of Yi Qingmei's death will definitely be the third princess. It was unconsciously suppressed by the Emperor in the depths of his sea of consciousness. Although the Emperor is old, his ambition not allowing is still it to surface. I just don't know if his awe-inspiring spirit is still there. In front of me in the end, what did you and Qingfeng talk about? If you think too much, gently pulled back the curtain of the carriage. And looked at the early autumn Jingdo Street. It was just a simple statement of fact. It was just like the eldest princess's evaluation of Fan Xian. The Fan manor appeared to be naturally on the road out of the city. In reality, passed the West City Gate. He was very emotional and was headed toward the country estate in the distance. However, in twilight, during the Jingdo rebellion, he entered the palace in the morning. The princess's wish had already been to the manor in the afternoon. She did not deign to grab Fan Xian's weaknesses. He boarded the carriage with Jingdo and went to the country estate. It was not a difficult matter for the Emperor to crush Fan Xian to death. An edict from the palace cold and harsh words. The surveillance of the Fan manor had completely ended. Using a direct attitude that he had never shown in front of the Emperor and Fan Xian had ended. Your Majesty has treated me very well after Fan Xian entered the palace very well. The Emperor. Inside there was no news of his return. The father and son were not acting. There wasn't even a related saying edict. What they wanted to say putting the most, aside what the officials for the first time, and the various powers were firmly and slowly spoke of his interactions with the Emperor had left just like that still one by one many people. When he got to the point where he spoke seriously was that the Fan manor in the royal study seemed to pass through the Jingdo City Guard's inspection as if it couldn't bear to see the father and son break apart. It had not been inspected at all. Only Fan Xian knew how well the Qing Emperor had treated Fan Jr. would leave Jingdo if it had been a crown prince. Although the Emperor's household did not have any other son running away in anger, standing in front of the execution field and saying these words, as well as the disputes these days, they would probably have died a long time ago. Their heads in confusion about Fan Xian's response. Perhaps many people were worried whether or not Fan Xian would leave Jingdo. Fan Xian with much affection. It was clear that the Emperor was not relatively speaking. Otherwise, he gave Fan Xian would not have removed all the surveillance listening to Fan Xian's calm recollection. Given Fan Xian the Emperor gradually straightened his body. My sister is in the palace. He then waved his hand tightly and has been sent out. I am not killing you not and relatives who rely on me to live are all in Jingdo. The Emperor closed his eyes. How can I leave? And was silent for a moment. Fan Xian tilted his head and looked at the autumn scenery what happened in the past the red twilight outside Jingdo. But in a quiet voice, perhaps he said, those people have always been watching me from above. Let's live well in your mother's son. Lin Warner's heart like a pair of eyes they have left in this world. She didn't know if Fan Xian's words came from the bottom of his heart to you, or as well as those some other meaning. If that staying in the Fan manor, he opened his eyes and idle person was the Emperor's edict. And they are all wrong. Then Lin Warner knew why Fan Xian was forced to accept this edict. I will stay in Jingdo. The Fan manor had received a bad piece of news when it opened. He did not thank the Emperor for not killing him at the first because there was no need for thanks. She had Teng Zijing take the Emperor allowed him to live, and the young master to the Fan manor outside the city. He would keep his eyes open. She was worried that something would happen later. and was prepared to quietly take the children back to Danzhou.
You will be obedient.
However, the country estate had only looked at his son and suddenly laughed. It turned out that the carriages taking the children had arrived at the country estate.
I don't believe it,
and could no longer believe it. It was not that there were soldiers waiting there.
That your dishonesty is a flaw.
A eunuch was already waiting.
I just hope that you won't
Under
be so
these circumstances
that I can't be
bothered
bothered
to
to
tolerate
tolerate
did not dare to act rashly.
Just stay in Jingdo.
The emperor glanced at him and suddenly
sent
said
the young
tiredly,
master
and
just
mistress
teaching
back
in
to
the
Imperial
Imperial
College is
who
good.
knew if something
Don't
would
touch
happen
the
on the
matters
way.
of the
Would
Overwatch
the court
Council
shed all
and
pretenses
the
of
palace
cordiality
treasury anymore,
and snatch
I
these
don't want
two
to
children
spend
into
too much
the
time
palace?
on you.
Just like
Having spoken
Fanruoro.
to this point,
Fan Xian
it could
furrowed
not
his
be
brows
said any
slightly
more
and
clearly.
said,
The
"In the
emperor
end,
was giving
I
Fan
still
Xian one
underestimated
last
the
chance to
meticulousness
live
of
if
the
he was
emperor's
willing to
thoughts.
be obedient.
Now that I think
Even
about
though
it,
this was a threat
the day
to his
you
life,
decided to
for
send the
some
children
reason,
back to
a
Danzhou,
glimmer of confusion
something had
grew
just
in Fan
happened in the
Xian's
royal
heart.
study.
He had not
Chen
thought that
Pingping
the emperor
had
would
just
make
been
such a
sent to the
decision in the
Overwatch
end.
Council.
The emperor
At that
looked at
time,
Fan Xian's
the emperor was
complicated
heavily
gaze.
injured.
Suddenly,
But he
his
still
heart
did
did
not
not forget about our
He thought
children.
of how Fan Xian
The
had
glimmer
blurted
of a
out
cold
father
smile
by the
rose to the
seaside
corners of his
Danzhou.
lips. After a
Truly,
moment of silence,
the emperor's
he said,
kindness is vast
"In the
and mighty.
future, if you
As
have nothing
officials,
to do,
we should thank him.
you can still come
It was
into
my
the
lack of
palace to
thorough
pay your
arrangements.
respects. Back
When
then,
you are alone,
we shouldn't have
I
waited
allow
in the
you to
country
call me
estate.
father.
We should
There
have
was
thought
no
of a
one
way
else
to
in the
send
royal
them directly
study.
to Danzhou.
It was completely
A glimmer
silent.
of darkness
Fan
flashed through
Xian's
Lin
body
Wanner's
froze
brows.
slightly.
She
Seriously,
had not thought
he
that her
replied,
uncle the emperor
"Yes, Your
would
Majesty."
be so cold and severe.
No one knew what
that he
the
wouldn't
emperor
even
and
let
Fan
go of
Xian
two
talked
children
about in the royal study.
At that time,
At least,
the most you could
when Fan
contact was the
Xian
first
walked out of
bureau.
the royal study,
My people were all
his body
scattered
was
outside
unharmed.
Jingdo, and had
If he
not
wanted
become
to
a
send them
spirit.
to Danzhou,
This
there was
reality
no
made
way.
most people in
Fan
the royal
Xian
palace
gently put his
let out
arm
a breath.
around her thin
The
shoulders
emperor
and
had also
comforted
issued
her.
an edict for
You've
Fan
been tired
Xian
enough these
to
days
return
and
to his
worried
position.
enough.
This
There
has
weren't
nothing
even
to do
any
with
obscure
you.
hints of
Our emperor
rewards.
even dares
On the
to use the
contrary,
temple.
at
Much
almost
less
the
two
same time
children.
Fan Xian
What
walked out
exactly
of the
did
royal
you and
study,
Qingping talk
a
about
few
in the
edicts
palace
that had been
Lin
prepared
Wanner
beforehand
sighed
were sent
and
out.
thought to herself
The
that
court,
the entire
with the
family was trapped
cooperation
in
of the 6
Jingdo.
ministries
The
and 3
emperor
temples,
did not show much of
began
his
to strengthen
extraordinary
the
faith.
purge of the Overwatch
Only this
Council
faint
and
threat was
palace
enough
treasury.
to make Fan Xian
The edict
and
summoning
her not
Suzhou
dare to
Zhizhou
act rashly.
Jiaolin.
Thus,
Jiazhou Judge Ho
she
Jichang,
changed the topic,
and the palace
and
treasury
continued to ask
transport
the
company,
previous question.
Su Wenmao to
She
the
also
capital
knew
to
about the
report on
matter
their
of the
work,
concubines,
had also been sent
as
out.
intelligent as
At
she
the
was.
same time,
She guessed the
edict
emperor's
naming Yan
intentions.
Bingyan the director
Thus,
of the Overwatch
she wanted to
Council
hear some
left
of
the
Shufang
palace's
Palace's
one step ahead
reaction
of the
from
others.
Fan Xian.
It was clear
What
that
can
the
I
internal
say?
court had
Fan
long
Xian
made
smiled
preparations.
faintly and said,
The emperor
Hong
saw
Zhu,
through his son
that
Fan
little
Xian
eunuch,
too well,
has been by my
even
side
if he
the
didn't
entire
want to kill
time.
him.
He
He
has
had
the
enough
emperor's
ways to
edict
trap
to
Fan
send me
Xian
out
in
of the
Jingdo.
palace, so he
Can
wouldn't
Qingping
move
and I
rashly
kick him
and
aside?
be too dishonest.
There was an ambush
As
in
for
these
whether or
words.
not the
For the
information
sake of
Fan
Hong
Xian
Zhu's safety,
had sent out through
Fan
the
Xian
Qing
had
unit
kept the secret
could,
tightly.
in the end,
Even the third
become a
prince did
bargaining
not know
chip
the
with the
true
emperor.
relationship
It
between
would depend
him
on
and
whether
Hong
or
Zhu.
not the emperor
Earlier in
had this
Shufang
kind of
Palace,
sensitivity
the
and
third
powerful
prince had
motivation
indeed been rude to Hong
beforehand.
Zhu.
In reality,
However, there is no
regarding
need to
these
worry
2
too
points,
much. There was
after
probably
all,
no one in
Qingping
this
has
world
performed
who
very
was
well
stronger
these
than
years.
the emperor.
How could the emperor bear
Fan
to have
Xian
the
walked
court
out of
fall
the
into
palace
chaos
with a heavy
again
face
because of my
Hong
relationship?
Zhu, who saw him out,
Fan Xian's
was
brows
careful
twitched.
and followed at
In
his
front
side
of
with
Hong
slight
Zhu,
fear.
I gave the third prince a good scolding. Chapter
In any
718.
case,
It
the
will
Fan
probably be
Manor's
very
carriage
difficult
traveled
for
on
me
the
to
road
enter
out
the
of the
palace
city.
in the future.
It had just passed the West City Gate.
I should
and was
quickly
headed
scold
toward
him.
the country
It would be
estate in the
best if I can
distance,
make
shrouded
Qingping
in
truly
twilight.
angry at me.
He entered the
carriage
palace
in the
moved
morning
gently along the
and
road.
only returned to
In
the
the
manor
distance,
in the afternoon.
the setting sun in the
Fan
western
Xian did
sky
not
dragged
tarry.
out a long
He
red
boarded
tail.
the carriage with
It
one
brushed
er
across
and
the
went to
nearby
the country
hills,
estate on
and
the
then the
outskirts.
faintly discernible
Last
head of
night,
Song Mountain
an
in the
edict
distance
from the palace had come
Who
out.
do you think you can
The
fool?
surveillance of the
Lin
Fan
Wanner
Manor had
leaned into his
completely
embrace.
ended.
Her
People
mood
had
was
thought that the
unusually
Cold
heavy.
War between the
Putting
emperor
on a
and
show
Fan
for
Xian
Hong
had
Zhu to
ended.
see.
Unexpectedly,
Will the emperor believe it?
after Fan Xian
Regardless
entered
of
the
whether
palace
the
to
emperor
see the
believes it or
emperor,
not,
there was
I
no
will
news
not
of of his return from the palace.
We will
There
also
wasn't
have
even
to
a
cut off
related
contact
edict.
in Duke's
Putting
Alley.
aside what
It
the
would be
officials
best
in
if you
court
don't enter
and
the
the
palace
various
as
powers
often.
were guessing.
Fan Xian
The
gently
fact that the
stroked her
Fan Manor's
face.
carriage had
After
left
a moment
just
of
like
silence,
that still
he
shocked
said,
many people.
"It's best if we
What
don't drag
surprised
other
many
people
people
into our
was
own
that
matters."
the Fan Manor's carriage
Lin
had
Wan
smoothly
straightened her
passed
body
through the
and
Jingdo
looked at
City
him
Guard's
calmly.
inspection.
What do you want
More
the emperor to
accurately,
believe?
it had not
To
been
believe that
inspected at
Qingping
all.
does not have true
Was the
affection
emperor
for
not
you?
worried that
Don't
Sir
forget
Fan
that
Jr.
Big
would
Brother
leave
is
Jingdo
still
in
in
a fit of
Dani.
anger?
Each day
Although
he
the
doesn't
emperor's
bring you and your
household did not
brothers
have
into the
children
palace.
running away in
The
anger.
emperor will
The
not be
scene
at
on the
ease.
execution
Isn't
field,
the matter of the
as well as
consort's
the
selection
disputes
clear?
these days,
Correct.
made
It is a
people scratch
separation.
their heads in
Fan
confusion
Xian
about
gazed at
Fan
his wife
Xian's
and said
response.
seriously.
Many people
It is
were
a
worried
true
whether
separation,
or not Fan
even if
Xian
something
would leave
happens to
Jingdo.
me.
Don't
It was
drag
clear that the
Qingping into
emperor
it.
was not worried.
Qingping did this in the
Otherwise,
past.
he would not have
I
removed
also
all
wanted
the
to do
surveillance
this.
outside the Fan
However,
Manor.
I don't
were
have
given
much foresight,
Fan such
so
freedom.
I prepared much
My
later.
sister is in the palace,
Lin Wanner sighed
and the
helplessly
emperor's
said,
edict has been sent
based
out.
on what you say,
The subordinates
the
and
emperor
relatives
still
who rely
intends
on
for
me to
Qingping
live
to
are all in
inherit the
Jingdou.
throne.
How can
Then
I
why
leave?
is there a consort
Fan
selection?
Xian tilted his head,
Just in case.
and looked at the autumn
This kind of
scene
thing is
illuminated
easy to
by the red
understand.
twilight outside
Fan Xian
Jingdou.
smiled slightly.
In a quiet voice,
It's
he
only a
said,
10-month
"Bring
pregnancy.
back Xiaohua and Liangzi.
How could it be so easy
Let's
to
live
have a
well
child?
in the manor."
Those beauties
Lin
are only
Wanner's heart
14 or
trembled
15
slightly.
years old.
She didn't know
If
if
they want to
Fan
be
Xian's
stepmothers,
words came from the
they will
bottom
have
of
to
his
endure
heart,
a bit longer,
or if they contain some other
Speaking
meaning.
of this,
If
Fan
Fan
Xian
Xian
sank
sank
into
manner
deep thought,
and being an
he
idle
thought of the
person
problem
was
of
the
the
emperor's
emperor's
masculinity.
Then Lin Wanner
If
knew
one
why
carefully
Fan Xian
calculated the
was
emperor's
forced to
age,
accept this edict.
given his great
The Fan
grandmaster
Manor
realm
had
body,
received a bad piece
the matter
of news
between
when
men
it
and
opened.
women should not
That
be
day,
too difficult.
Lin Wanner had
However,
immediately
he was
made a
getting
decision
older,
to have
so his
Teng Zijing's
desires
sin
would
the
probably
young
grow
mistress
thinner.
and young master
Concerning the
to the fan
repercussions
manor
of the
outside
tyrannical
city.
martial secret,
She was worried that
Fan
something
Xian
would
knew
happen
better
later
than anyone,
and was prepared
adding
to
to the
quietly
discussion
send
he
the
had with
children back to
Sigajian at the
Danzhou.
end in Dongyi.
However,
Fan
the manor
Xian
had
confirmed
just
that
sent
the
news
emperor's
that the
body no
carriages
longer
sending
had
normal
children had
meridians.
arrived at the manor.
Instead,
and
it
could
had
no
become
longer
like
leave.
a completely
It was not that there was an
unobstructed
army
channel or
waiting
vessel.
there.
Only this
Rather,
could allow
a
the
eunuch
physical
was already
body
waiting
to contain
under
so
these
much tyrannical
circumstances.
Jinqi.
Teng
Only
Zijing
then
did
could
not
he
dare
use
to
one
act
finger
rashly.
to guide half a
If he
lake into
truly
Kuzi's
secretly
body
sent the young
and
master
forcefully
and
fill a
mistress
great
back to grandmaster
grandmaster
to death,
who knew if
no
something
matter
would
how
happen on the
tyrannical
way,
it was still
would the court
tyrannical.
shed all
It
pretenses
only
of
had the name of
cordiality
the way of the
and
emperor.
snatched these two
How could
children
there be
into
a
the
true
palace?
change?
Fan
Fan
would be the
Xian
same
thought
with
of this
Fan
and raised his brows
Fan
slightly.
Xian's brows furrowed slightly.
He
In
had
the
proven
end,
that the
I
emperor's
still
constitution
underestimated
was
the
cold on the
meticulousness of
outside
the emperor's
and dry
thoughts.
on the inside.
Now that I think
His
about
breathing
it,
disturbed
the
his
day he
nature.
decided to
He
send the
probably
children
needed
back
to
to
eat a few
Danzhou.
more Lingxiang pills.
Something had just happened
If he didn't
in the
have
royal
Lingxiang
study.
pills to eat,
Chen Pingping
then
had
eating
just
more
been sent
celery
to
would
the
be
Overwatch
good.
Council.
Garlic.
At that
Fan
time,
Xian lowered
the
his
emperor
head
was
slightly
heavily injured
and thought about
but
the
he still
Imperial
did not
Academy
forget
of
about our
Medicine's
children.
conclusion.
My
He prayed to the
arrangements were
heavens
not
to
thorough.
ensure that a great
At the time,
grandmaster's
we
body
shouldn't have
was
waited
no
in the
different
manner
from a mortal's
we should
body.
have thought of a way to
Celery,
send them
garlic,
directly
and
to
bean
Danzhou.
products.
A glimmer of
Particularly the
darkness
first
flashed
one
through Lin
had a
Wanner's
powerful
brows.
killing effect.
She had not thought
Without
that her
question,
uncle the emperor
only
would
Fan
be so
Xian knew
cold
this
and
knowledge,
severe
that
the
he
Imperial
wouldn't even
Academy
let
of
go
Medicine
two
did not
children.
know. At
Hong
that
Zhu
time,
did not understand.
you could only contact
Even
the
the
first
emperor
bureau.
did not know.
My people
Whether
were
or
scattered
not the
outside
tricks Fan
Jingdou.
Xian,
If he
did in
wanted to
secret
send them
would bear
barefoot
fruit
in the future,
there was no way.
would depend on
Fan
whether
Xian
or
gently
not
put
the
his
heavens
arm
would
around
help.
her thin shoulders
As long
and
as the
comforted
emperor
her.
did not have any
You've
more
been
children,
tired enough these
then the
days and
third
worried
prince's
enough.
position would
This
be
has
as
nothing to
stable
do
as
with
Dong
you.
Mountain.
Our emperor
This was
even
Fan
dares to
Xian's
use
hope.
the temple,
Perhaps
much
making
less
the
two
emperor
children.
have no more
Fan
children.
Xian gently put
Sounded
his
like
arm
a
around her
sinister
thin
plot.
shoulders and comforted.
However, Fan Xian
You've
did
been
not
tired
think
enough
so.
these days
The
and
emperor
worried
already
enough.
had 3 sons.
This has nothing to do
That was
with
enough.
you.
If
If
he had
even
more,
dares
it
to
would
use
just
the
create
temple,
more trouble
much
for
less
the
two
Qing
children.
kingdom in the fight for
What
the
exactly
throne.
did you
At
and
least,
Qingping talk
he did
about in
not
the
make the
palace?
Li family die
What
without
exactly did
descendants.
you and Qingping talk
Thinking of
about in the
this,
palace?
Fan Xian thought
Lin
of
Wanner
Chen
sighed
Pingping
and thought to
couldn't
herself,
resist smiling.
the entire
I
family
still
was
have the heart
trapped in
to offer.
Jingdou.
The
The emperor
emperor
did
did
not
not
reveal
reveal
much
much
of his
ruler.
extraordinary face.
Lin Wanner was
Only
slightly
this faint
surprised to
threat
find
was
that
enough to
Fan
make Fan
Xian
was making
and
another
her not
rare
dare
poem.
to act rashly.
Thinking about it closely,
Thus,
she
she
changed
found
the
that this
topic
poem only
and
talked
continued
about
to
the
ask the
grievances
previous
of an
question.
official.
She
also
looked
knew
at
about
Fan
the matter
Xian
of
in
the
a daze and
concubines.
wondered if he was
As
truly willing
intelligent
to
as she
forget the
was,
death
she
by
guessed
the
the
emperor's
cuts in
intentions
front of the royal
Thus,
palace.
She
and the
wanted to
bloody
hear
case
some
in
of
Shifeng
Shifeng Courtyard's
Courtyard's
reaction
reaction
from Fan Xian.
As for the emperor,
what can I
Yi
say?
Qingmei,
Fan
Chen
Xian smiled
Pingping,
faintly.
Fan Jian,
Hong
and that
Zhu,
group of
that
old
little
people,
eunuch, has
Fan
been by
Xian
my
had
side
already
the
told
entire
Wanner
time.
everything.
He has
Only
the
now
emperor's
did Lin
edict
Wanner
to
know
send
that
me
in the
out of the
shadows of
palace.
the royal palace
Can
and
Qingping
behind
and I
history,
kick him aside?
there were
There
so
was an
many
ambush
heartless
in these
choices
words.
and vengeance.
For the sake of
Thus,
Hong Zhu's safety,
she did not not have the
Fan Xian
extravagant
had kept
hope
this
that
secret
Fan
tightly.
Xian would actually
Even the
obediently
third prince
stay
did
in the
not
manner
know the
as
true
an idle
relationship
person.
between him
However,
and
she
Hongzhu.
heard these two lines
Earlier
of
in
poetry.
Shufang Palace.
As she thought this,
The third prince
the
had been
carriage arrived
somewhat
at the
rude to
Fan clan's
Hongzhu.
country estate.
However, there
the
is no
entire
need to
clan,
worry too
young
much.
and old,
After
had already
all,
received the
Qingfeng
news
has
ahead of
performed
time.
very well
They
these
waited
years.
obediently
How could
outside
the emperor
country
bear to
estate
have
for
the
the
court
arrival
fall
of
into
the young
chaos
master
again
and mistress
because of my relationship?
Although Fan Xian no
Fan
longer had
Xian's
an
brows
official
twitched.
position, in front
He
of
was still the
Hongzhu,
backbone of the
I
Fan
gave the
clan.
third prince a good
Other
scolding.
than the vengeance.
In any case,
he still had to
it will
shoulder
probably
the people
be
his
very
father
difficult
had
for me
entrusted
to enter
him.
the palace in
Dusk
the future.
shone on the gates of
I
the
should
country.
quickly scold him.
Cece was carrying Fan Liang.
It would be best if I
Shunning,
can make
who was
Qingfeng
wearing a
truly
large
angry
flowery
at me.
farmer's
The
clothing,
carriage moved
was
gently
holding
along
onto
the
her
road.
leg.
In the
She
distance,
looked curiously at
the
her
setting
parents
sun
who
in the
were getting
western
off the
sky
carriage.
dragged out a long red tail. It brushed
She was
across
already
the
3
nearby
years
hills,
old,
and then
had
the
no
faintly
problem
discernible
remembering
head of
people.
Song Mountain
Fan
in the
Xian
distance.
accepted Fan Liang's
Who can this
embrace
fool?
from Cece's
Lin
hands
Wan'er leaned
and
into his
quietly
embrace.
said something by her
She felt
ear.
her heart was
He then
unusually
smiled
heavy, and had the
putting
people
on a
waiting
show
for
for
him
Hongju
quickly
to see.
disperse.
Will the
He
emperor
then pulled
believe
Shenning's
it?
small hand,
Regardless of
and
whether
walked
the
into
emperor
the central
believes it or
room.
not,
He asked,
I will not see
"Has Xiao Hua
Qingping
been
in the
good
future."
lately?
When
We
they
will
reached
also
the
have to
central
cut
room,
off contact
the
in Duke's
well-behaved
alley.
Shunning let
It would
go
be
of her
best
father's
if you don't
hand
enter the
and
palace
threw
as
herself
often.
into Lin Wanner's
Fan Xian
arms.
gently stroked her
Cece
face.
was busy making
After a
arrangements
moment
for
of
the night's
silence,
rest.
he said,
Fan
"It's
Xian
best
turned
if we
his
don't
eyes
drag other
and
people
saw a
into our
eunuch in
own
the central
matters."
room.
He
Lin Wanner
nodded
straightened
toward
her
the eunuch.
body and looked
The
at him
eunuch's
calmly.
expression was very
What do
ugly.
you want the emperor
There
to
was
believe?
also a hint of
To
fear on
believe
his
that
face.
Qingping does not
He
have
quickly
true
went
affection for
forward
you?
and kowtowed to
Don't
Fan
forget that
Xian
big brother
before
is still
leaving
in the
the
country
country
estate.
Each day
The
he doesn't
eunuch's
bring
figure
you and your
disappeared
brothers
through the
into the
door.
palace.
Only then
The
did
emperor
Teng
will not
Zijin
be
walk
at
out on
ease.
his crutch.
Isn't the
and
matter
spit
of the
at the
consort
figure's
selection
back.
clear?
Pay attention to
Correct,
hygiene.
it is separation.
Fan Xian said with a smile.
Looked at his wife
In the
and
fourth
said
year of the
seriously.
Qing calendar,
Fan Xian
Teng
gazed at his
Zijin
wife
had been
and said
heavily injured
seriously,
in order to protect him.
"This is a true
One
separation.
of his legs had been
Even if
broken
something
by an
happens to
assassin.
me,
Don't
although
drag
he had gotten
Qingping
much
into
better
it.
after being
Chen
nursed
Pingping
back
did
to
this
health.
in the past.
He often used
I
a
also
crutch
wanted
at home.
to do this.
Teng Zijin
However,
looked at him and
I
said
don't
with
have much
shame,
foresight.
"I was
So I
useless
prepared
and
much
was
later."
unable to send the young
Lin
master
Wanner sighed
and
helplessly
mistress
and
away."
said, He then
"Based
continued,
on what you say,
I had
the
planned
emperor
to kill
still
that little
intends for
eunuch,
Qingping to succeed.
but I was afraid it would
Then,
cause trouble
why is there
for
a
you.
consort selection?
Don't look at him,
Just
in
because
case.
he's a little eunuch
This kind
who
of
doesn't
thing
know
is easy
anything.
to understand.
He represents the
Fan
emperor.
Xian said with a
How could you
slight smile.
casually kill him?"
Fan Xian
Fan
smiled
Xian said
slightly
carelessly.
and said, He
"It's
then
only a
touched the
10-month
large flowery
pregnancy.
dress Shunning was
How could it
wearing
be
and
so
said with
easy
a
to have a
smile.
child?
It's quite
Those
bright.
beauties are only
The
14
wife of the
or
Tang
15
family
years
came
old.
out with hot tea.
If they want to be
She smiled
stepmothers,
embarrassedly
they will
and
have to
replied,
endure for a
"It's
few
third
more years."
sister-in-law's daughters.
Speaking of this,
It shouldn't have been
Fan
worn
Xian
by the
sank
young
into deep
mistress.
thought.
But he thought of the
Teng
problem
Zijin
of the
scratched
emperor's
his head and said,
masculinity. These
"If one
days,
carefully
there's no way to
calculated
get
the
news
emperor's
from the
age,
manor. Given
the
his
elders in the clan
great-grandmaster realm
discussed it
body,
with my family,
the matter between
and thought
men
it would
and
not be
women
difficult
should not
to
be
hide
too
it from
difficult.
that little eunuch.
However, he was
They were
getting
just
older,
worried that there
so
might
his
be an
desires
ambush
would
from the
probably
court
grow
along
thinner.
the way.
Concerning
Thus,
the
they
after-effects
planned
of
to
the
disguise
tyrannical
the young
martial
mistress
secret,
and young master
Fan
as
Xian
country
knew better
children.
than anyone
If
else.
something happened,
Adding to the
we would
discussion
see if
he
we
had
could
with
secretly
Sika
send
Jian
them
at
away.
the end in Dongi.
Fan Xian's
Fan
heart
Xian
jumped.
confirmed
He
that
knew
the
what the
emperor's
people
body
in the
no
clan
longer
were
had
preparing
normal
to do.
meridians.
He then thought of the
Instead, it
bloody
had become a
case and
completely
tightly courtyard
unobstructed
on
channel or
River.
vessel.
Only
Ruoro's
this could allow
biological
the
mother
physical body
seemed to be
to
like the
contain
wife
so
of the
much
Tang
tyrannical
family in
energy.
front of him.
Only then
His
could
face
one
darkened
point
and
and
he
he
said,
said,
body
"In
on
the
Dong
future,
Mountain.
don't think
and
about
force
such
a great
foolish
grandmaster
things.
to death.
How can you hide
No
it
matter
from
how
others?
tyrannical it
Don't
was,
harm other
it was
people's
still
children for
tyrannical.
nothing."
It only had the name of the way of the
Seeing
emperor.
that Teng Zijin
How could
only
there be
made
a
a
true
casual
sound of agreement, and did
Fan
not take
Xian
it
thought of
seriously,
this,
and raised
Fan
his brows
Xian sighed in
slightly.
his heart and
He had
scolded.
proven that the emperor's
elders in the clan
constitution
can
was
be said
cold
to
on
be
the
foolish.
outside and dry
How
on
could
the
you all be
inside.
so foolish?
His breathing disturbed
Fortunately,
his nature.
the fan
He would
manor had
probably need
opened
to
and
eat
Fan
a few
Xian
more
had rushed
Lingxiang
over.
pills.
Nothing
If he
had
didn't
happened,
have Lingxiang
so
pills
there was
to
no
eat,
need to say
then
these
eating
things
more
now.
celery would be
However,
good. Garlic,
thinking of the clan
Fan
members
Xian
who had
lowered his
welcomed
head
him at
slightly
the entrance of the
and
country
thought about
estate
the
earlier.
Imperial Academy
Even
of
someone
Medicine's
as cold as
conclusion.
Fan Xian
He prayed
couldn't
to the
help but
heavens
be
to
moved.
ensure that a
His
great
heart was
grandmaster's
moved,
body
but he sank
was no
into an
different
even
from a
deeper
mortal's
worry.
body.
Traveling
Celery,
alone under heaven,
garlic, and bean
he could
products,
happily repay
particularly the
kindness
first
and
one,
enmity.
had a
Even if he
powerful
spilled
killing
his
blood
effect.
and threw away
Without
his head.
question,
It was
only
all in
Fan
exchange
Xian
for
knew
no
this
regrets.
knowledge.
The
Chen
Imperial
Pingping
Academy
still
of
wanted to
Medicine
send the
did
girls
not
in the
know.
garden to
Hongju
Dongi,
did not
but
understand.
there were so many people
Even the
around
emperor
Fan
did not
Xian.
know
How many
whether
could he
or
send
not
away?
the tricks Fan
There was
Xian
only one
had
life
done
in
in
which to
secret
have
would
no
bear
regrets.
fruit in the future.
It was not an
would
easy
depend
matter.
on whether
Their
or not
family
the
did not
heavens would
stay
help
long
him.
in the clan
As
estate.
long as the emperor
After
had
only
no more
one
children,
night,
they picked up
then
their
the third
children.
prince's
The
position
next
would
day,
be as stable
the
as
family of
Dong
5
Mountain.
left the manor
This was
to
Fan
return to
Xian's hope.
Jingdo.
Just as
the
the emperor
had
had
said in the royal
have no more
study,
children.
and just as
sounded
the
like a
eldest princess
sinister plot,
had said one
However,
day to her
Fan Xian
strategist.
did not think so.
Fan Xian's
The emperor
weakness
already
was
had
too
3
fatal.
sons.
As long
That
as
was
he
enough.
grasped this point,
If he had
even
more,
if he grew wings,
it would just
or
create
could he
more
escape
trouble
to?
for the Qing
Even if he
kingdom's
could
future
escape,
in the
would he
fight
want
for the
to?
throne.
If he didn't
At least
escape,
he didn't
he
make
could only
the Li
face
family
it.
die without
But the
descendants.
snowy mountains were so
Thinking
high
of
and so
this,
cold.
Fan Xian
Holding
thought
a
of
pair of
Chen
children,
Pingping, and
Fan
couldn't
Xian
resist
sat in the
smiling.
carriage with a
I
smile.
still have the heart
His
to
gaze
offer my
occasionally
services,
looked through the window
but I
at
have
the
no
Tsang
reason
Mountains,
to see a wise
reflecting
ruler.
the white light
Lin
from the
Wanner
east
was
in the
slightly
morning.
surprised to
The
find
Tsang
that
Mountains
Fan
were on
Xian
the
was
west
making
side of
another
Jingdao.
poem.
They were
Thinking
far
about
from
it
the
closely,
official road.
she found
But
that
they were
this
tall
poem
and
only
majestic,
talked about the
piercing the
grievances of
clouds.
an official.
It was only
She looked
early
at Fan
autumn,
Xian in a
so the
daze,
top of the
and
mountain
wondered
had
if he was
long been
truly
covered
willing
in
to
snow,
forget the death,
adding a
by
touch
a
of
thousand
coolness
cuts
to the
in
world.
front of the royal palace.
Do you still remember
and the
those
bloody
2
years
years of
of winter in the
courtyard
Tsang
decades
Mountains?
ago?
Fan Xian
As for the
suddenly
emperor,
asked,
Yi Qing
after
Mei,
he said this,
Chen Pingping, Fan
expressions
Jian,
of happiness
and that
and
group of old
reminiscence
people
appeared on Lin
Fan
Wanner
Xian
and
had
Cece's
already told
faces.
Wanner everything.
The first year,
Only now did Lin
Cece had
Wanner
been
know that in
purposely
the
left
shadows
behind
of the
by
royal
Fan
palace
Xian
and
in
the
the
old
old
manor
history.
in Jingdao,
There were so
the
many
second
heartless
year,
choices
she still
and
went with
vengeance.
him.
For
Thus,
the young people of
she
the
did
Fan
not have
Manor,
the extravagant
snow
hope
in
that
that Song
Fan
Mountain
would
could
actually
clear
stay
their
obediently
and
in
wash
the
their
manor.
faces.
However, she
It was
heard
a
these
beautiful
two lines
little
of
world
poetry.
completely cut
As
off
she
from
thought
Jingdo.
this,
The
their
carriage
Fan
arrived
Sien
at the
could
Fan
fully
clan's
reveal
country
emotions
estate.
and emotions
The
that
entire
were different
clan,
from
young
this
and
world.
old, had already
Regardless of
received
whether
the
it
news
was
ahead
playing
of time.
mahjong or
They
chatting,
waited obediently
the warm
outside
calm
the
in the
country
winter
estate
snow always
for the
brought
arrival
back
of the
such
young
memories.
master and mistress.
The carriage gradually
Although
grew
Fan
quiet.
Sien no longer
Lin
had an
Wanner thought
official
of Yu Ling,
position,
and
he was
Rojia,
still the
who
backbone of the
occasionally
Fan
went
clan.
up the mountain.
Other than the
These
vengeance,
days,
he
the
still
Fan
had
Manor
to
and
shoulder the
Jingdo had
people
been
his father
surrounded.
had entrusted
Presumably,
to him.
Yiling
Dusk
was
shone
worried
on the
sick
gates of the
outside.
country. Cece was carrying Fan
Other than
Liang,
worrying about the
shunning
Fan
Manor,
who was wearing a large
Rojia was
flowery
probably
farmer's
also
clothing,
worried about
was
King
holding
Jing's
onto
matter
her
in the
leg.
palace. How is King
She
Jing?
looked curiously
Lin
at her
Wanner
parents
asked
who were getting
worriedly.
off the carriage.
The emperor's anger
She
has
was already
subsided,
3 years old,
naturally,
and had no
he will be
problem
allowed to
remembering
return
people.
to the manor.
Fan
He
Sien
didn't even
accepted
punish
Fan
me,
Liang's
much
embrace
less him.
from Cece's hand.
Fan Sien shook
and
his head.
quietly said
He
something
thought of
by
his
her
brother,
ear.
Sija.
He then
He
smiled
didn't know if there
and
would
had
be
the
any
people
problem
waiting
for him
after
quickly
he heard the
dispersed.
news in the north.
He then pulled
with
shunning
so many
small
things
hand
happening
and
in
walked
Jingdo.
into the central
Sitting
room.
by Fan
He
Sien's
asked,
side,
Has
Shunning
Xiaohua been good
suddenly
lately?
looked at the snow
When
on
they
the
reached
Song
the
Mountains.
central room,
Pursing
the
her
well-behaved
lips, she
Shunning
said in a
let go of her
childish
father's
voice,
hand
so high,
and threw herself
it was very
into
high
Lin
and
Wanner's
difficult to go
arms.
up.
Cece
Fan
was
Sien
busy
narrowed
making
his eyes
arrangements
slightly
for the night's
and
rest.
gazed at the top
Fan
of the
Sien
Song
turned
Mountains.
his eyes and saw
He
a
took a
eunuch
deep
in the
breath.
central room.
On that snowy
He nodded
mountain
toward
were
the
his
eunuch.
most beautiful
The eunuch's
memories, and the
expression
Qing
was
kingdom.
very ugly.
There was also the time when
Uncle
Uncle
Fu
Fu
took him to climb the
He
mountain
quickly went forward
and lie in
and
the
kowtowed
snow.
to Fan
He
Sien
knew how
before
difficult
leaving
it
the
was
country
to climb
estate.
to the peak of
The
that
eunuch's
snowy
figure
mountain.
disappeared through
His
the door.
eyesight was startling.
Only then did Tung
Suddenly,
Zijing
he
walk
saw
out
a
on
few
his
eagles
crutch and
circling
spit at
around
the figure's
and
back.
doing their best
Pay
to fly
attention
toward
to
the
the
highest
hygiene,
peak of the
Fan
Song
Sien
Mountains.
said with a smile.
Unconsciously,
In the fourth
he
year of
pointed
the
to
Qing
Shunning and
calendar,
said,
Tung
Look, if you
Zijing
can
had been
actually
heavily
go up,
injured in
it is
order to
actually
protect
very
him.
beautiful.
One of his legs had been broken by an assassin. Although he had gotten much better
Chapter
after being nursed back
721.
to health.
In the
He
spring,
often used a
if
crutch
he
at
planted
home.
a lot of
Tung
corn,
Zijing looked
would
at
he be
him
able to
and said
harvest a
with
lot
shame,
in the autumn?
I was useless
Perhaps in
and
the
was
eyes of
unable
many
to send the
people,
young
sowing
master and
melons
young
and
mistress
getting
away.
melons.
Sowing
He then
beans,
continued,
reaping what you sow.
I had planned to
Karma
kill that
begets
little
karma.
eunuch,
Hard
but I was
work
afraid
makes
it
up
would
for
cause
one's lack
trouble
of
for you.
talent. And
Don't
it was
look at
best to
him,
fish for
just
some
because
reward.
he's a little eunuch
After
who
Fan
doesn't know
Sien
anything.
came to Jingdo
He
from
represents
Danzhou,
the emperor.
he had worked his
How
life
could you
out for the
casually kill
Qing
him?
court many times.
Fan Sien said
and brought a lot
carelessly.
of good
He
fortune
then
to the
touched
people.
the large flowery
Although he
dress
was not a
Shunning was
righteous
wearing
and
and said
benevolent
with a
person,
smile,
he
It's
had,
quite
either
bright.
automatically
The
or
wife of the
consciously,
Tung family came
planted
out
a
with
lot
hot
of good
tea.
fortune. She smiled
Unfortunately,
embarrassedly and
by
replied,
the autumn of the
its
10th
third
year of the
sister-in-law's
Qing
daughter.
calendar,
No
it
good
shouldn't have
fortune
been
had
worn by
come.
the young mistress.
All of his official
but
positions had
Tung
been
Zijing
taken away,
scratched his head and
and all
said,
of his power
These
had been
days,
taken away.
there's no way to get
all of
news
the
from
family
manor.
he cared about
The
had become
elders in the
disguised
clan
hostages.
discussed it with my
He
family
had become a commoner
and thought it would not
he
be
had become a
difficult to
wealthy
hide
man
it
of
from that
leisure,
little eunuch
who could only listen
We were
to
just
songs
worried that there
and
might be
wander
an
around
ambush
Bai
from the
Rapport
court
along the way.
No one dared to
Thus,
speak up for
we
him,
planned to disguise
and no
the
one
young
dared to
mistress
plead
and
for
young
him to His
master as
Majesty.
country children.
All the officials
If something
and
happened,
citizens
just
we would
calmly
see if we
watch
could
the scene
secretly
unfold.
send them away.
They even watched it
Fan
calmly,
Sien's heart jumped.
showing kindness
He knew
without
what the people
asking
in
for
the clan were
repayment.
preparing to
Did
do.
Fan Sien have
He then
this kind
thought
of
of the bloody
mentality?
case in Taiping
No one
courtyard
knew.
on
In
Lujing
people's
River.
eyes,
Sir
Roro's
Fan Jr.
biological mother,
No, the little
seemed
Duke
to be
no,
like the
Fan
wife
Sien
of the
had
Tung family
perfectly
in
played the
front
role
of
of a
him.
wealthy man
His
of
face
leisure
darkened
since
and
the
he
autumn.
said, All
In
he
the
did was
future,
stroll the
don't
streets
think
and
about
alleys
such
of Jingdo,
foolish things.
soak in Bai
How can you hide
brothel,
it from others?
play with the children
Don't
in the
harm
manor,
other people's
gossip
children
with
for
the women
nothing.
in the family, and read the new
Seeing that
novels
Tung
published
Zijing
by
only
Donbo
made a
Bookstore.
casual sound of
The
agreement
Donbo medical
and
shop
did not
across
take
the
it
door from the
seriously.
bookstore was
Fan
still
Sien
open.
sighed in his
The
heart and
doctors of the
scolded.
Imperial
The
Academy of
elders in the
Medicine
clan can be
were
said to be
replacing
foolish.
Fan Roro.
How could
in
you all be so
practicing
foolish?
medicine among the people?
Fortunately,
No one knew
the
if
Fan
this
Manor
was
had
the condition
opened and
the
the
icy
Fan
woman
had
in the
rushed
palace
over.
had made to
Nothing
the
had happened. In any
so
case,
there was no need to say
the young
these
lady
things
of the
now.
Fan family
However,
remained deep in the
thinking
palace.
of the clan members
Fan
who had
Xian
welcomed
no
him
way
at
of
the
entering
entrance
the
of the
palace
country
to
to
see
see
her.
earlier.
He could only
Even
change
someone
his
as
original
cold as
idea
Fan Xian
and
couldn't
ask
help
his
but be
wife to
moved.
enter the palace
His heart
many
was
times
moved.
to see.
But he sank
Just like
into an
this,
even deeper
a month
worry.
passed peacefully.
Traveling alone
the
under
Fan
heaven,
manor was so quiet
he could happily
that it was
repay
almost
kindness
forgotten
and
by the
hatred.
people of
Even
Jindo.
if he spilled his
Fan
blood and
Xian
threw
was
away
so
his
silent
head,
that he was
it
almost
all
about
in
to
exchange for
disappear
no
in
regrets.
people's discussions.
Chen Pingping
However,
still wanted to
there was
send the
one
girls
place
in the
that
garden
could not
to forget
Dongi,
Fan Xian.
but there were so
it
many
was the
people
Imperial
around
College.
Fan Xian.
Although the
How many
Emperor's
could he
edict
send
had
away?
taken away
There was
all of
only
Fan
one
Xian's
life in
official
which to live
positions.
without regrets.
He had thrown him
How
an
could it be
empty
so
position
as a teacher of the Imperial College, did not stay long in the clan about estate. 20 days ago, after only one night, because they picked up their children to be a wealthy idler in the manor. The family of 5 left the manor to return to the land of gentleness, just as the emperor began to attend royal study at the Imperial College. And just as the eldest princess, the Imperial College, one day to her surrounded by ancient trees, Fan Xian's weakness was as quiet and secluded as usual. As long as he grasped the news that Fan Xian even was if coming to the Imperial College, where could he escape to? Stirred up the even students. If he could escape, would he want to? In the open space in front of the Qingxin Pond, but the snowy mountains were so high and so cold, gathered together, holding a pair of children with great interest. Fan Xian sat in the carriage with a smile, was to give lectures to these students through the window at the Tsang Mountains, the Qingxin reflecting the white light because there were too many students who came to listen to his lectures. Were on the west side of Jingdo. The Imperial College they were far from the official road. They could only listen to his mischievous suggestion, clouds, and place the class between heaven and earth. So the top of the mountain had long been covered in snow, perhaps Fan Xian, adding a touch of coolness to the world. The endless autumn rain. Do you still remember those 2 years of winter? The content of the class was actually very simple. Suddenly asked. It was mainly about the collections of histories and expressions of happiness that the great northern Qi scholar appeared on Lin Wan'er and Cici's faces. Had used his entire life's work to compile. Cici had been purposely left behind by Fan Xian had used a number of years of effort. And the with the great support of Dong bookstore for the young people of the Fan Manor, carriage of books. The snow in the Tsang Mountains was also relatively familiar with their faces. When it was a beautiful little world, completely cut off from Jingdo. Stage fright. Their Fan Xian could fully reveal emotions and emotions that were different from this world, regardless of whether it was playing mahjong or chatting. And with the warm Kong in the winter snow always brought back such memories. He would personally take gradually became debate with the students below the steps. Lin Wan'er thought of Yiling as for the contents of the debate, who occasionally went up the mountain. Because it was a bit disrespectful. These days, it did not spread outside the Imperial College. Presumably, Yiling was nothing right also now, worried about at least in the Imperial College, and in the hearts of these young students. He was still a very remarkable figure. At least, he was a person with some special privileges. Fan Xian lazily ended the day's classes, and couldn't be bothered to pay attention to the red-faced and thick-necked students' unrelenting verbal attacks. Clapping his hands, he walked down the stone steps and said, "I told you a long time ago, I can basically only memorize the classics and classics. If you want me to say something profound and meaningful, I can't say it clearly, although I understand the principle of sending troops with a good reason. How can there be such a thing as a righteous battle in this world? It's nothing more than an excuse. The Qing kingdom's mighty army points its sword to the world. Naturally, it is for the sake of saving the people." The student brought a dozen friends and caught up to Fan Xian's butt. Very unconvinced, he said something. Today's topic touched on the period when the Wei kingdom was founded. Using plain words, both sides were analyzing the problem of the righteousness of war. Yet this problem was the one that Fan Xian could not explain clearly. He also believed that not many people in the world could explain it clearly. Fan Xian got into the carriage and left the Imperial College. He no longer paid attention to the students who were still angry and dissatisfied behind him. The carriage traveled for a while on the streets of Jingdo. It then escaped the liveliness of the Imperial College's silence and returned to the clear autumn scenery. He unconsciously pulled open the curtains and looked at the scenery outside with a smile. However, he could not hide the sliver of melancholy between his brows. He had been a wealthy and idle person for a month. This was only a superficial appearance. He just wanted to create an appearance for the court and the palace to see. In Fan Xian's heart, there had always been a fire that was the complete opposite of his outward calm and happiness. However, this fire had been suppressed very well by him. Furthermore, he was forced to suppress it because the situation at hand still did not give him any opportunity to take advantage of. After returning to Jingdo, Fan Xian had never returned to the Overwatch Council, particularly after he had completely exiled the members of the Qinian unit from the capital. Even contacting the First Bureau had become difficult. However, this did not mean that Fan Xian did not have other sources of information. He knew that in only a month, the emperor had, with Yan Bingyun's valiant assistance, successfully suppressed most of the unstable elements in the Overwatch Council. The work of changing the blood was also progressing methodically. It was just a matter of when it would be completely cleaned out. The news from Jiangnan was also not very good. All of these signs were the source of Fan Xian's worry. He found that he had still underestimated the control and power of imperial power in a feudal society. Even the Overwatch Council that Chen Pingping, and he had worked hard to run for decades, was developing in a direction of submission under the coercion of imperial power. Fan Xian furrowed his brows. The problem between him and the emperor appeared to be in the Overwatch Council, the palace treasury, and Jingdo. In reality, it was under the heavens. All of the Qing court officials, the wise people among the people, and even Hu the scholar and Yin Bingyin, did not understand this. Thus, they did not understand why the emperor would deal with Fan Xian like this. He had taken away all of Fan Xian's official positions and power, yet allowed Fan Xian to live freely in Jingdo and still maintain a secret influence. Fan Xian's present state was neither dead nor alive. Only he and the emperor knew why this state was. If it was just to deal with Fan Xian alone, the emperor was much stronger than him. Without any effort, he could knock Fan Xian into the dust, and then step on him, so that he would never be able to rise again. The problem was that outside Jingdo, and even outside the Qing kingdom's borders, Fan Xian's secret influence was terrifyingly powerful. Even with the emperor's confidence and pride, he could not underestimate this level of valiance. Thus, the emperor had Fan Xian stay in Jingdo, neither dead nor alive. Then he slowly and steadily whittled away at Fan Xian's influence outside Jingdo. At the same time, he had to cut off Fan Xian's invisible hands that stretched outside the country's borders. This was a process of quantitative change leading to qualitative change. If he did not eliminate Fan Xian's influence to the point where the Qing court could bear the risk, the emperor would not actually kill him. Even if Fan Xian died, if Dongyi and Shiliang truly fell into chaos, the emperor would not want to see this scene. If the emperor could perfectly control these problems, then what was so important about Fan Xian's life or death? The carriage arrived at Baiwa brothel with familiarity. Fan Xian got off the carriage and entered the building with his hands behind his back. He walked directly toward the courtyard by the lake in the back. He didn't even glance at the figure at the end of the street behind him. The person watching Fan Xian was an ascetic monk. No one knew how many ascetic monks were watching him in secret. The problem was that ascetic monks could not get close to women. Fan Xian entered Baiwa brothel, so they couldn't follow. Passing through the slightly cool lake surface and the breeze, Fan Xian walked into the courtyard that had been set aside for him. Looking at the increasingly charming and beautiful brothel owner in front of him, he smiled and said, "What new songs do you have to listen to today?" Shi Qing covered her mouth and smiled. "Young master doesn't write poetry anymore. Where would there be any good songs for you to listen to?" It had already been a number of years since Fan Xian had searched the brothel. Yet this Shi Qing woman did not show any signs of aging. Fan Xian looked at her with narrowed eyes and smiled. He didn't say anything more. In reality, there was no need for the spies of the internal court to keep an eye on him. Everyone in Jingdo knew that Sir Fan Jr. had long become a half-crippled rich man of leisure. His greatest pleasure was to come find the girls in Baiwa brothel. A rich man of leisure, Fan Xian truly lived up to this reputation. Although he had no official position or power, he still had money. No one knew exactly how much gold and silver was hidden in the Fan Manor. On the surface, the Baiwa brothel in the Fan Manor had long swallowed up most of the high-class brothels in the world with the strength of the Qing kingdom and the protection of the Overwatch Council these years. Under the rules and regulations Fan Xian had single-handedly made, Baiwa brothel had already opened all over the world. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it had already unified the brothel industry. Baiwa brothel's nominal owners and shopkeepers, Shi Chanli and Sangwen, were still developing businesses in Dongyi. They had already extended their hands into northern Qi Shangjing. Everything was going smoothly. No matter where they were prominent figures. Of course, everyone knew that Fan Xian stood behind them. Fan Xian lay on the soft couch and contentedly accepted the two girls' massages. His eyes were closed, but his brain was spinning quickly. Baiwa brothel was, in the end, an industry. The court could not be too shameless about it. The palace also did not want to completely destroy the Fan Manor's reputation, so they had left Fan Xian, such a comfortable place. What comforted him the most was that it was clear that the people of this era had, in the end, underestimated the usefulness of a brothel in terms of intelligence. A few years ago, Fantasia and the third prince, these two brats, were lawless and out of control. They had created a business that had now become one of Fan Xian's trump cards. What excuse did the court use for Su Wenmao's dismissal? Fan Xian asked with slightly lowered eyes after the courtyard had quieted down. As Fan Xian's trusted aide and a court official, Su Wenmao could not leave his post without permission. He could only wait helplessly for the court to act. Not long ago, an edict had been sent directly to the 3 large workshops in North Min to bring Su Wenmao back to the capital. This was originally a very secretive matter. Because of the existence of Baoyue brothel, Fan Xian knew about it earlier than most people in Jingdo. Because he had long been mentally prepared, Fan Xian was not shocked or angry. He only thought worriedly about whether the people the Qinian little group had sent to North Min had been explained clearly to Su Wenmao. He believed that Su Wenmao, a cheerful second in command, would not stupidly oppose the court head-on. However, he was worried that time was too tight, and Su Wenmao would not be able to arrange enough people in the palace treasury. The palace treasury was Fan Xian's second route. The palace treasury transport company had already been completely taken over by the emperor, but Fan Xian would not allow this route to be directly cut off by the palace. If it was to be cut, it had to be done by Fan Xian. Furthermore, once the knife was cut down, it would make the Qing court feel bone-deep pain. Thinking of this, he thought of the heavily guarded Tin family village to the north of Dongyi, the 3 large workshops, the royal palace, and the one in his mind. A glimmer of a smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. The hands in his sleeves slowly tightened into fists. In Shiliang Road, Deng Ziyu had successfully escaped from the court's secret net. However, no one knew where he was hiding. Since there was no news of Deng Ziyu's death in the intelligence reports, Fan Xian felt very comforted. However, the members of the 4th Bureau were now without a leader. He didn't know if they could withstand the pressure from the Overwatch Council in Jingdo. The order Hong Yiqing had received was to first go into the grasslands to find that person, and then come back to contact the powers in Dingzhou and Qingzhou. He hoped that everything would be in time. Gong Dian has already arrived in Dingzhou, Shiqing, said with her head lowered. Fan Xian was silent and speechless. He had indeed not thought that the emperor's reaction would be so fast. He had actually moved the commander of the imperial army directly to Dingzhou to hold down the fort. Although Li Hongqing had led troops in Dingzhou for a number of years, his foundations were still shallow. Gong Dian was also an old member of the Dingzhou army. His experience and contributions were there. Hongqing would probably not be able to withstand it, and would be forced back to Jingdo. If he wanted to think of a way for Hongqing to remain in Dingzhou and control a portion of the military power that belonged to him, then he had to make Shiliang fall into chaos first. Fan Xian furrowed his brows tightly. He realized that everything had long left his control. He could only hope that the first group of people he sent to the grasslands would be able to quickly contact Hu Ge, and have the Hu people on the grasslands go against the heavens and first launch an attack in this early winter. Things were too chaotic and complicated. How could Fan Xian truly be idle? He glanced at Shiqing helplessly and asked, "How is the investigation of the Ministry of Works corruption case going?" Sir Yang, Shiqing glanced at him worriedly. "Yesterday the case was decided. This afternoon, the Supreme Court will issue a clear verdict." Although she had once belonged to the second prince, under Fan Xian's coercion these years, she had long been unable to have second thoughts. Furthermore, as a woman from a brothel, she knew that the young man in front of her was faintly different from all the nobles in Jingdo. She wanted to be the second Sangwon, but not the second Yuan Meng. Thus, seeing Sir Fan Jr.'s right and left arms being torn off one by the court, she couldn't help but feel terrified and afraid. Fan Xian glanced at the light on the surface of the lake. He was silent for a moment and then said, "It's afternoon. I'll go get him." From the time the case of Yang Wanli, the vice minister of the river department of the Ministry of Works, was reported to the time the case was handed from the Ministry of Justice to the Supreme Court, had only taken a dozen days. This kind of efficiency was enough to make one sigh in admiration, even in the history of the Qing kingdom. Those who didn't know the inside story would probably think that the emperor's edict to clean up the bureaucracy had suddenly become real in the Qing kingdom's 10 years. As for the true officials, when they saw this scene, they couldn't help but sigh and feel cold. Because they all knew what kind of person Yang Wanli was. He was a capable and honest official who had endured for 2 whole years on the embankment of the Great River. Yang Wanli was one of Fan Xian's 4 disciples. The silver that Sir Fan Jr. had privately raised had flowed like water through the river transport governor's yamen and into the riverbanks. It had all passed through his hands. If he had truly wanted to be greedy, it would not have been the few thousand liang of silver stated in the crime report. Instead of eating the fat meat, he was going to take the bribes from the Ministry of Works yamen? Furthermore, all of the officials knew that Yang Wanli's family was very strict and treated his subordinates very leniently. Putting aside the Overwatch Council's salary, that was many times that of court officials, just the 3 officials who held positions in the Qing kingdom were actually supported by the Fan Manor every year. A mere few thousand liang of silver was not a difficult matter. Everyone knew that the Fan Manor was the foremost god of wealth in the world. How could Yang Wanli be greedy? It was precisely because they knew this that the officials knew that Yang Wanli's trial was only the palace's idea. Under the single-handedly arranged by Scholar He of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, the trial proceeded quickly. Today the Supreme Court was going to pass judgment. According to some insider information, if the scholar had not taken pity on Yang Wanli's talent and forcefully interfered, Sir Yang's fate would probably have been even worse. Fan Xian stood alone in front of the door of the Supreme Court yamen, alone and waiting for the result of the judgment inside. The bailiffs outside the Supreme Court yamen had long recognized his identity and were frightened. They had long sent word to the people inside to know, but they could only stand trembling in front of Fan Xian. Fortunately, Fan Xian did not fly into a rage. He only waited silently for Yang Wanli to come out. The yamen closest to the Supreme Court was the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council. The little bastards of the First Bureau discovered that the director was here and couldn't resist standing outside the door of the yamen, forcefully suppressing their excitement as they watched this scene. The First Bureau was Fan Xian's old nest. Back then, the rectification had created a group of loyal subordinates. Otherwise, there would not have been a large group of First Bureau officials escorting him out of the city when he made a scene at the execution field that day. Although Mutai had long been kicked out of the Overwatch Council, these officials still saw Fan Xian as the director and refused to accept Yin Bingyin. However, the Qing law and the council were strict. These officials could only watch the lonely Fan Xian from a distance and give him moral support. Fan Xian did not turn his head to look at those children. He continued to look at the Supreme Court yamen. A comforting smile rose to his face. A mighty sound rang out from inside the yamen. Before long, the former litigation master of the Overwatch Council, Jingdo's richest mouth, Song Shuren, silently walked out of the Supreme Court yamen. There was no joy on his face. On the contrary, there was a hint of darkness. Ever since Fan Xian had been stripped of his position as the director of the Overwatch Council, Song Shuren, a non-staff member, did not want to stay in the Overwatch Council anymore. Instead, he had come directly to find Fan Xian. Fan Xian had not thought that this rich mouth would have such a grateful side. After feeling slightly surprised, he settled him down. Coincidentally, the court was beginning to clean up Fan Xian's people. For the sake of the court's face, they could not use the methods of special agents. Everything had to respect the Qing law. Thus Fan Xian had sent him out. At least, he had to help his subordinates obtain a relatively fair ending. Looking at Song Shuren's expression, Fan Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. Right now, I can't enter the yamen. That's why I'm asking you. We've all seen the case. There's no reason we can't win. We know that the court has arranged for witnesses and evidence, but there's nothing we can do. Song Shuren sighed and looked at Fan Xian. Didn't you also use this method to punish the Ming family in Jiangnan? Fan Xian's heart trembled slightly. His voice was suppressed to a cold line. In a stern voice he said, I don't expect to help Wanli escape punishment. However, the victory I speak of at least, I have to see him right now. 3 years in prison, Song Shuren said dejectedly. Working for Sir Fan Jr. was like going against the entire court on his own. No matter how he fought this case, he would lose. How can there be such a thing as a prisoner? Fan Xian angrily rebuked him. 3,000 taels of silver, at most 3,000 li. The law of the Qing kingdom clearly states that returning the stolen goods and returning the money can be considered a crime. How did you fight this lawsuit? Song Shuren wanted to say something but stopped. He forced a smile and said, naturally, the Qing law is written like this. Originally, returning the stolen money and discussing the crime had already been agreed upon yesterday. However, when Scholar he came to see the trial today, he erased this clause and changed it to imprisonment. Zhongwei. Hearing this familiar name, Fan Xian did not get angry. On the contrary, he smiled. After a moment of silence, he took out a banknote from his clothes. Restraining his expression, he calmly said, go in again and give this banknote to the official of the Supreme Court. Ask him how exactly did he learn the Qing law. Do you want me to personally stand out and fight this lawsuit with him? Song Shuren accepted the banknote and looked at the 30,000 liang on it. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth, stamped his feet, and walked back up the yamen. He knew that Fan Xian had done this because he had been forced by the court into a corner. For the sake of Yang Wanli's life and death, Fan Xian could only stand out and sell his not-so-old face. It all depended on what the officials of the Supreme Court would think. No one knew what Song Shuren said after he went in. Before long, an official coughed gently and walked to the bottom of the stone steps. He said something by Fan Xian's ear. Fan Xian did not reply. He only shook his head. The official's expression was helpless as he walked back. Finally, Song Shuren helped Yang Wanli out of the yamen of the Supreme Court. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. He could see that Yang Wanli had been tortured in the prison. A dark fire surged in his heart, but he took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed it. He called for a few servants to lift Yang Wanli into the carriage. Yang Wanli brushed past him. This teacher and student, who were very close in age, did not say anything. However, a glimmer of dissatisfaction flashed through Yang Wanli's eyes, as well as a glimmer of grief and anger. Fan Xian felt a chill. He knew what Yang Wanli was grieving and angry about. An official who wholeheartedly wanted to do something. Yet because of these trivial matters in the court and royal palace, he had to endure an injustice that he did not have. Not only would he lose his position and be tortured, but his reputation would also be tarnished. As a scholar, who could bear this? Just as Fan Xian was preparing to leave, the scholar of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, Zhongwei, accompanied by a few officials, slowly walked out of the yamen of the Supreme Court. Zhongwei looked at Fan Xian and was silent for a moment. He then said, Master Fan, you are very elegant. Fan Xian couldn't even be bothered to glance at him. This attitude made the officials by Zhongwei's side angry. The situation in Jingdo was no longer what it was in the past. Zhongwei was currently popular, but Fan Xian had long been a commoner. To not answer an official's question in front of him was against the rules. Zhongwei did not have any emotional reaction. He asked, I am very curious. What exactly did you say to that official earlier, for the official of the Supreme Court to suddenly change his mind? This was something that scholar he was very curious about. He often entered the palace and knew that the crack between the emperor and Sir Fan Jr. could no longer be mended. Thus, when he looked at Fan Xian now, he was not as afraid as he had been in the past. He had come to the hearing by imperial edict. He had secretly done something to ensure that Yang Wanli, one of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, would never have a chance to rise again. He had not expected that everything, which had gone according to plan, would suddenly change. It was clear that this young man was no longer favored by the emperor and held no official position. Why had the officials of the Supreme Court been frightened back by his words? Zhongwei thought hard but could not understand. He didn't know what kind of magic Fan Xian had to make these officials not even listen to the emperor's hints. Fan Xian turned his head and glanced at him coldly. I said to that official, don't force me to act out. You want to force me to act out? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at He Zongwei's slightly dark face. Suddenly he smiled slightly and said, Actually, I also want to know, what can you do to me when I flatter an official of the court on the street? After these words were said, the officials at He Zongwei's side finally understood that Fan Xian's power did not just lie in official position and power. They took a step back in fright, but He Zongwei continued to stand calmly in front of Fan Xian. He sighed. Understanding the reason, he couldn't help but feel some regret. In terms of official position and power, he might be able to suppress him. However, in the face of ruthless and unreasonable killing, he would never be as arrogant as him. The Suzhou Zhizhou, Cheng Jialin, was accused of visiting a prostitute and invading the mausoleum. He has been asked to return to the capital to defend himself. In a few days, he will probably come back to the Supreme Court, He Zongwei said warmly. It looks like even you, a wealthy and idle person in Jingdou, cannot truly be idle. Fan Xian's eyelids drooped slightly. Casually he said, You are the emperor's dog, so you have to run around everywhere. I don't. Many years ago, Fan Xian had already slapped He Zongwei in the face. Now outside the yamen, he had coldly called He Zongwei a dog on the street. It was like slapping him in the face again. After all, He Zongwei was no longer the little imperial censor of the past. As the first-ranked official in court, he had his own face to consider. Furthermore, there were so many people watching. His slightly dark face gradually changed. In a cold voice he said, As an official, I am the emperor's dog. In my eyes, you are also the emperor's dog. Are you not? Scholar, he thought that these words were appropriate. Not only did he preserve his dignity, but he also blocked these words and made it difficult for Fan Xian to respond. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian smiled when he heard these words. If I am a dog, then what is the emperor? Fan Xian said with a cold smile as he looked at him mockingly. He then turned and climbed into the carriage. He Zongwei's expression froze. He knew he had said the wrong thing. It was just like how he didn't understand how Fan Xian could influence the Supreme Court. No matter how he had been demoted, he was still the emperor's flesh and blood. On this point alone, the people of the world could not compare. A powerful sadness rose in He Zongwei's heart. He felt that life was always so unfair. In Jingdou, Fan Xian could not be idle. When he met the emperor's combination of punches with great difficulty, he could only focus on blocking. He had no ability or method to counterattack. On the true battlefield between him and the emperor, a soul-stirring drama was playing out. These dramas had no audience and were not recorded in the annals of history, but they were truly playing out. Only in these places could Fan Xian have enough power to carry out the most decisive counterattack against the chess pieces the emperor had laid out. In Dingzhou and Shiliang Road, no one knew what kind of entanglement Li Hongqing and Gong Dian, who had come to take over his position, were having. On the road from the Qing kingdom to Dongyi, the armies of the two sides were facing off. No one was willing to give way. The 3,000 soldiers of the Yanjing camp for winter training were forcefully blocked at the border, not daring to take a step in. This situation had been at a stalemate for 3 days. The emperor has an edict for us to enter Dongyi to assist the great prince in quelling the rebellion. In the end, the great prince has blocked it with a military order, saying that his 10,000 elite soldiers are enough. The commander of the Yanjing camp, Wang Jikuan, looked at his trusted aides in the tent and smiled coldly. Since those 10,000 elite soldiers are quelling the rebellion in the Liang kingdom, who can stop our soldiers from entering Dongyi? When he said this, Wang Jikuan's anger finally exploded. This was originally a test the court had sent toward Dongyi. Everything had been going according to plan. If the great prince had not sent troops to stop them, these 3,000 elite soldiers would have been the vanguard. The Yanjing camp had prepared 20,000 people to advance along the road. Who knew that these 3,000 elite soldiers would be blocked at the border and not be able to take a step in? He pointed at the generals below and scolded, 1,000? Are 1,000 people enough to scare you out of your wits? They are also soldiers of the Qing kingdom. Do they actually dare to attack the army sent by the court? Those are the Black Knights, a general said in a trembling voice. Chen Pingping is dead, and Sir Fan Jr. is under house arrest in Jingdo. Who knows if these Black Knights, who kill without batting an eye, will actually pull out their swords. The corners of Wang Jikuan's eyes twitched slightly, but he didn't curse angrily. As for this secret military operation, he had nominally accepted the Bureau of Military Affairs winter training. In reality, he had accepted the emperor's secret edict from the palace. Just as he said earlier, this was a test. This was the emperor sitting on the throne testing his eldest son far away in Dongyi. The news of the Jingdo incident had long reached Yanjing. Only now did Wang Jikuan know that the duke had led the Black Knights straight into Jingdo to save old Director Chen. The commander of Yanjing didn't know why Director Chen had suddenly been purged by the emperor. Although he sighed slightly in his heart, as a soldier of the Qing kingdom, he had to obey the emperor's edict. Not long after the Jingdo incident, the Great Prince suddenly sent an urgent military report saying that volunteer armies were rising and falling within Dongyi. The chaos of war was frequent, and it was impossible for him to escape and return to the capital in a short time. This blocked any way for Jingdo to summon him back. Wang Jikuan knew that the Great Prince didn't want to return to the capital. As the saying goes, when a general is outside, the ruler's orders cannot be obeyed. It was clear that the Great Prince, who had successfully controlled 10,000 elite soldiers, had already left the emperor's heart because of the Jingdo incident. Once the Great Prince's attitude was revealed, the emperor was not angry. Instead, he sent an edict to Dongyi, saying that he would send the Yanjing military into Dongyi to help the Great Prince quell the rebellion. Just as Wang Jikuan expected, the Great Prince forcefully refused the Yanjing camp's request to send out troops. Furthermore, the group used to stop the Yanjing army these 2 days was indeed not the Great Prince's people. The court couldn't even find an excuse. The Black Knights. Wang Jikuan furrowed his brows slightly, thinking of this group of riders, which were not many but had exceptional battle power. He naturally thought of that idler in Jingdo. It's the last 2 days of 2008. I had wanted to write a separate chapter to canvas for votes and review, but I changed my mind and decided to leave it for when Qingyu was finished. A friend has said that the flavor of Qingyu has changed recently and is no longer sunny. I would like to explain this a little. Qingyu has actually not been sunny for a long time. With such a dead person, there is no sunlight. Ever since I started writing Qingyu, I have always had an opinion that Fan Xian is not like a transmigrator. How should I explain this? I will leave this question for the last time, as it takes up too many words. Of course, if there are friends who have noticed this, presumably you will know that my attitude toward transmigrators has long been made clear. However, I have always been curious. What should a transmigrator be like? In reality, human nature really has not evolved. Modern people, ancient people, and other people, as long as they are people, they are all equally ugly and beautiful. I almost forgot again. I seriously recommend to everyone Zhang Yu, the Fat Tabby Cat's new work, Song of the Heavenly Sword. The book number is 112-1194. It is said that this author is a very gay and serious author. His writing speed is slow, but the quality is very good. From the day he wrote to the day he was reincarnated, presumably many friends like him. I am the same. This book is a wuxia novel. Those who write wuxia novels in this marketplace, without question, have invested far more in the battle of the spirit than in the battle of business. This kind of attitude has already ensured the quality of this book. I deeply believe this. Chapter 722. We have to go. Wang Jikuan did not say these words. He only glanced coldly at the generals in the tent and slapped the table. In a meaningful and heartfelt tone he said, I don't care who these Black Knights belong to. I only know that the Bureau of Military Affairs Winter Training Order says very clearly that no one can stop the 3,000 riders of the Yanjing camp entering Dongyi. The 3,000 Yanjing soldiers were just a test. They were the vanguard. It was the attitude the court was showing as it pressed toward the Great Prince step by step. Wang Jikuan's eyes narrowed slightly as a cold light gradually rose in them. He squeezed his voice into an icy line. No matter what, the 10,000 soldiers the Great Prince leads are, in the end, people of the Qing kingdom. The great prince cannot take the risk of a mutiny and bring those soldiers to stop them. Thus, the problem at hand is the 1,000 Black Knights placed around Nyoto Mountain. The day after tomorrow, we will send the Bureau of Military Affairs transfer order to them. If they are still not willing to give way, then it can only prove that they are no longer part of the Qing Kingdom's army. But the emperor's attitude toward Sir Fan Jr. is still unclear, a general said worriedly. If the Yanjing camp actually fought with the Black Knights, it would be the same as officially shedding all pretense of cordiality with Fan Xian's faction. The atmosphere in Jingdo was very delicate. The generals in Yanjing did not know exactly how the person in the palace was planning to deal with Fan Xian. If they just wanted to give Fan Xian the cold shoulder, then the Yanjing camp's actions were too dark and heavy. In the future, it would be difficult to salvage the situation. The tent was deep in Yanjing. It was actually a very large room. However, it had a name with a strong military flavor. The generals in the room were all Wang Jikuan's trusted subordinates, so there were many things they could say that were not taboo. Some things could be said openly. The worry the general spoke of earlier was actually the worry in Wang Jikuan's heart. The emperor had indeed removed all of Fan Xian's official positions, but he had never truly questioned him. Who knew how the situation would develop in the future? Outside Yanjing, the 1,000 Black Riders at the foot of Nyoto Mountain were indeed a powerful force. However, Wang Jikuan had led troops for 20 years. The Yanjing camp controlled 100,000 elite soldiers. Just based on numbers and equipment, they were the best of the Qing Kingdom's 5 roads border soldiers. It was impossible that they could not break through the 1,000 Black Riders' blockade. The problem at hand was that it was impossible for Yanjing to throw in all its troops. Once the flames of war ignited, Dongyi would only belong in name. The hearts of the people would not be settled. It would probably lead to the Qing Kingdom's first true civil war. Wang Jikuan did not dare to bear this kind of historical responsibility. His position in the military had already climbed to the top. Regardless of what other contributions he made on the battlefield, at most, he would return to Jingdo like Commander Yi and become the head of the Bureau of Military Affairs. There would be some progress in his reputation, but in reality, there were no benefits. For this governor of Yanjing, there was very little room left in life for him to struggle. Thus, he had to think about the descendants of his family and the future. Although the emperor still looked down on the world, he was, in the end, old. There would come a day when he would pass away. If Fan Xian could survive this storm. No, even if Fan Xian couldn't. Once the third prince sat on the throne, given his relationship with Fan Xian, would he tolerate him? Wang Jikuan's brows were furrowed tightly. After all, he was a military commander. He was skilled in strategy on the battlefield, but it was difficult for him to notice the movements in the details. The matter of the Jingdo concubines had not allowed him to understand the emperor's plans. His brows furrowed tightly, and then relaxed. Finally, he made up his mind. In a cold voice he said, "We'll move the day after tomorrow. If anyone dares to stop us, seize their weapons." All of the Yanjing generals had their own thoughts, and left the camp with heavy hearts. They were not sure if the military operation the day after tomorrow would actually cause a conflict with the Black Knights. They also did not know if the great prince in Dongyi would actually lead the 10,000 elite soldiers back to the east and directly oppose the Qing Kingdom's border soldiers. To sum it up, these loyal Qing generals were worried whether the Qing Kingdom's first civil war would erupt in the area under their jurisdiction. Governor Wang seemed to have made up his mind. That night, he went to the Mei Manor and found the leader of the civil officials in Yanjing, Mei Zhili. Mei Zhili was Duke Lu's student. Although he did not have a deep relationship with Fan Xian, he was familiar with Fan Xian. After hearing Commander Wang's sincere request for advice, Sir Mei lightly asked Wang Jikuan a question. "Ji, is still in Jingdo, right?" Mei Zhili had left his position as the Jingdo magistrate in the 4th year of the Qing calendar and had come to Yanjing. He cooperated harmoniously with Governor Wang's military and political affairs and rarely meddled. Governor Wang deeply understood Sir Mei's foresight and strategy. Just by being able to leave the position of Jingdo magistrate unscathed, one could tell how capable he was in officialdom. The two of them had a good personal relationship. So Sir Mei addressed the young lady of the Wang family as naturally as he would a junior, and only called her Ji, her. Hearing the word Ji, Governor Wang's expression did not change. His heart, which had been tempered by the ice and snow of the battlefield, trembled involuntarily. He knew what Mei Zhili wanted to make clear. Wang Ji had entered Prince Huqing's manor in June, and become the great prince's secondary fei. Before this young lady was married, she had been exhorted to her face by Fan Xian, and lectured for a number of months. Other than Jingdou and Yanjing, most people in the world knew that other than Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Fan Xian had 3 other students of noble status. The first was the 3rd prince, the second was the young lady of the Yi family, Yiling, and the third was the young lady of the Yanjing Governor Wang's manor. In the Qing kingdom, filial piety was the most important word, followed by the word of one's teacher. Given the relationship between the Yanjing manor and Fan Xian, the 1,000 black knights, blocking the foot of Nyoto Mountain, appeared complicated. Wang Jikuan glanced at Mei Zhili. After a moment of silence, he said, "There is an edict from the palace, and an order from the Bureau of Military Affairs. Even if it will incite some discussion in the future, this matter has to be done." "Governor, you misunderstand." Mei Zhili's eyes were focused on his nose, and his nose was focused on his heart. He had already escaped the political whirlpool of Jingdou for a number of years. Originally, he had no intention of participating in this major matter. However, he was born in the manor of Duke, and had too deep a connection with Yi Guipin, and the 3rd prince in the palace. Although he was currently in Yanjing, if he wanted to escape in the future, it would probably be very difficult. Thus, tonight, he had spoken these words clearly in front of Wang Jikuan. The teacher-student relationship between Sir Fan Jr. and Ji is certainly worrisome. Most importantly, Mei Zhili sighed and looked at Wang Jikuan. "You want to send troops to Dongyi, but anyone with eyes can see that the great prince is no longer listening to Jingdou's edict. Ji is a secondary fei of the manor. Have you thought about this problem? If the great prince truly takes over Dongyi and makes himself king, even if you gather 100,000 soldiers in Yanjing and take down Dongyi, what will Ji do in the manor?" Wang Jikuan had guarded the Qing kingdom's borders for many years, and had suffered hardships. At the age of 40 he had a daughter. He loved her like a treasure, and couldn't help being arrogant and willful. This created Wang Tong'er's bad habits. Fortunately, Fan Xian had forcefully suppressed her bad temper. Every time he thought of this, Wang Jikuan felt a bit of gratitude toward Sir Fan Jr. However, after being pointed out by Mei Zhili, he said in a daze, "Perhaps Sir Fan Jr. had long predicted the present situation? Is that why, contrary to everyone's expectations, he used his status as an official of Taichung Temple to facilitate the great prince's marriage to Ji?" Thinking of this, Wang Jikuan's heart chilled. He had not thought that the Duke would have such deep and far-sighted plans. It truly made one's heart tremble. Wang Jikuan's position was truly awkward. Although the Yanjing camp was powerful, Dongyi, where its blade was pointed, was already within the range of the great prince and Fan Xian's power. Yet, these 2 young nobles had an inextricable connection to Wang Jikuan. One was his son-in-law, and the other was his daughter's teacher. Mei Zhili thought for a moment and then said, "As for what Sir Fan Jr. was thinking at the beginning, there is no point in you and me guessing now. However, there is something I must remind you. If I can think of the problem here, then the person in the palace can also think of it. Yet the palace still hasn't done anything to Yanjing." He raised his head and glanced at Wang Jikuan lightly. If Sir Fan Jr. had truly predicted the present situation, then it can only be said that he had great foresight. "Governor, you hold the fort in Yanjing, yet you are targeting Dongyi. If the emperor suspects that you are not diligent enough, then no matter who comes, it will probably be difficult to solidify the Yanjing military's morale. Thus, Dongyi's safety will be a bit more guaranteed. My loyalty to the emperor can be seen by the sun and moon. If Fan Xian wants to use this, it won't work." There was no anger in Wang Jikuan's words. Mei Zhili nodded and said, "It is clear that Sir Fan Jr.'s arrangements have not been effective. Jingdou has not done anything to Yanjing. In the end, The emperor is a wise ruler and trusts you greatly. Even the military order from the Bureau of Military Affairs and the secret edict from the palace are actually a test the emperor has given you. Wang Jikuan was stern. He raised his fist in a salute and said, I have learned my lesson. Mei Zhili's expression remained serious. Slowly he said, But governor, are you really not going to consider Tong anymore? Consider the discussion of the world. If you can truly subdue Dongyi in one battle, you will be a meritorious official of the Qing kingdom. Once civil war breaks out, and the flames of war continue, the pressure from all sides will be piled onto your shoulders. But what can I do? If I truly suppress my troops and do not move, I will be letting down the emperor's trust. Wang Jikuan's brows rose. The conflict in Jingdo will, in the end, land on the battlefield. As the emperor's official, there are many things I have to do. I have to do it. If I can't, then I won't do it. Mei Zhili looked at him calmly. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, To say something disrespectful, this is, after all, a family matter of the emperor. As officials, you and I must be loyal to the emperor. If the Qing kingdom truly breaks out into civil war, how will you and I explain it to the world? The change in Jingdo should land on the battlefield. However, it is clear that Sir Fan Jr. and the emperor do not wish for this turmoil to spread too far and wide. Otherwise, the emperor would not continue to let Sir Fan Jr. live, and Sir Fan Jr. would not stay in Jingdo as a wealthy and idle person. Those two are both guarding that bottom line. Governor, when you send out your troops in 2 days, please remember this bottom line. You can threaten or invade, but if you really want blood to flow like rivers, I think it is not wise. I'm afraid that is not the result the emperor wants. But the other party is the Black Knights. Those wolf cubs of the Overwatch Council do not know what it means to retreat, Wang Jikuan said with his eyes closed. This is too difficult to grasp. You have to send out troops, but you can't actually fight. You can't ruin the emperor's grand plan, but you also have to prevent the situation from becoming too serious. Speaking of this, Governor Wang let out a deep sigh. He had lived his entire life in the light of knives and shadows, but he had never encountered such a complicated situation. If they wanted to fight, then fight. That was the simplest. Even if the other party was Fan Xian or the Great Prince, if they truly threw the east of the kingdom into chaos, the emperor would not be happy. Since the emperor has a secret edict, we have to fight. At the very least, we have to truly confront each other and suppress the Black Knight's momentum. Mei Zhili's eyelids drooped slightly. The palace's edict must be carried out. Pressing down like a storm on a mountain, how many days can the Black Knights resist? Although they are a group of cold-blooded riders who kill people like flies, the Great Prince is not, and neither is Sir Fan Jr. This kind of situation will not last for many days. In the end, they will have to shed all pretense of cordiality. Wang Jikuan looked at him and reminded, The emperor's edict is here. I don't want the emperor to mistakenly think that I am not doing my job well. No, there will certainly be an opportunity for the situation between Yanjing and Dongyi to stabilize. Mei Zhili looked at him and suddenly smiled slightly. Sir Fan Jr. has spent so much effort on Shang, in your relationship with the Great Prince, in order to seek a balance between the two sides. As for the emperor's edict, I think he will certainly have a way to end this matter. Although it is difficult to disobey an edict, I do not want to meet the men of the Qing kingdom on the battlefield. Wang Jikuan's brows were furrowed deeply. A moment later he slowly said, However, I cannot see any way in the current situation that I cannot disobey an edict and still withdraw troops from Nyoto Mountain. That will depend on Sir Fan Jr.'s methods. Mei Zhili calmly extended a finger. If he wants to continue, he needs a variable. We don't know what this variable is, but Sir Fan Jr. will certainly know. Wang Jikuan sighed and said, I don't believe he can do this. If he can actually find this variable within 5 days, I'm afraid I will have to be like Shang, and admire him endlessly. 2 days later, there was a somber atmosphere both inside and outside Yanjing. The border soldiers that had gathered from various military camps gathered in front of the city and set out toward the east. After traveling for half a day, They had met up with the 3,000 Yinjing soldiers they had sent earlier and arrived at the foot of Nyoto Mountain. A government road passed by the foot of Nyoto Mountain, passing through the golden and bright red edge of the late autumn forest and extending toward the shore of the East Sea. Following this road, the army could reach Dongyi. The black mass of soldiers gathered there. Banners fluttered in the wind. The riders wore light armor and had a murderous aura. There were more than 10,000 people in this army. Their aura looked very frightening. However, such a menacing Qing border soldier was held back at the foot of Nyoto Mountain and could not advance a single step. At the entrance of the government road at the foot of the mountain, there were 3 rows of black armored riders waiting solemnly. There were only 3 rows, a total of 100 or so riders. However, they gave off a frightening coldness as they blocked the center of the road. On both sides of the gentle slope halfway up the mountain, there were 2 even thicker black ink lines. They were also the Black Knights. In order to show his loyalty to the emperor, Yanjing Governor Wang Jikuan had put in a lot of capital for this test. He had sent 10,000 border soldiers. Of course, the governor would not personally lead the troops. The one leading them was one of his trusted generals, who had already received a secret order. This general looked at the Black Knights on the road in the distance and felt a chill in his heart. The Qing military had long been famous and envious of the Black Knights of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. They had the best equipment, the best war horses, and the light armor all over their bodies were personally made by the 3 workshops of the palace treasury. Their battle power was completely piled up with gold. There had always been a legend within the military that if the Black Knights did not exceed 1,000, they could not be defeated if they exceeded 1,000. This was, of course, because the generals of the Qing military deeply knew the power of the Black Knights during their cooperation over the decades. It was also because the Qing law and edict strictly limited the number of Black Knights to below 1,000. Of course, there were military generals who were not convinced. The name of the elites of the Qing military shook the world, regardless of whether it was the Dingzhou cavalry or the Long Arrow camp of the northern camp. They were all illustrious figures. How could they allow a subordinate cavalry of the Overwatch Council to steal all of the limelight? During the Jingdo Rebellion 3 years ago, Fan Xian had led 500 Black Knights into Jingdo and engaged in a bloody battle under Xingyang Gate. The Black Knights were like death gods from the underworld. In front of countless pairs of eyes, they had forcefully torn apart the rebel army cavalry. Those were the elites of the old Qin family. Even Qin Hung had been stabbed to death by the Black Knights' spears. This iron-like reality made the Qing military truly understand the power of the Black Knights. No one dared to underestimate them again. They even felt an indescribable fear in their hearts. The Yanjing general narrowed his eyes and looked at the lone rider in front of the Black Knights. From the other party's silver mask, he clearly knew the other party's identity. It was the commander of the Black Knights of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, the silver-masked Jing Ge. The Yanjing general's heart chilled slightly. He knew that the commander of the Black Knights was the fierce general who had stabbed Qin Hung with one spear. After thinking for a moment, the Yanjing general led a few soldiers and squeezed their horses' bellies. With a clatter, they moved closer to the Black Knights' defensive line. Commander Jing, the Yanjing general ordered his subordinate to hand over the Bureau of Military Affairs transfer order. In a heavy voice he said, "Please make way." Jing Ge silently accepted the Bureau of Military Affairs transfer order. After glancing at it he said, "We are only under the jurisdiction of the Overwatch Council. Until now, we have not received any council orders, so forgive me for not being able to comply." The Great Prince led 10,000 elite soldiers and was actually stationed in the Song Kingdom, not far from Nyoto Mountain. However, in order to deal with the court's inquiries, he could not personally lead troops to stop them. He could only give this task to the Black Knights. The mask on Jing Ji's face glowed with a cold silver light. Looking at the densely packed Yanjing army in front of him, he said in a heavy voice, "I am under orders to guard Dongyi. Unrelated people are strictly forbidden from entering. If anyone dares to take a step and kill without mercy." His words were spoken very clearly and calmly, yet it carried an unquestionable certainty. Under orders to guard Dongyi? Under whose orders? Sir Fan Jr.'s? However, Fan Xian was no longer the director of the Overwatch Council. As for only listening to the orders of the Overwatch Council, that was even more of a joke. If Yan Bingyan truly sent an Overwatch Council official to mobilize troops, the Black Knights would probably cleanly execute the person, and then burn the council order into a pile of black ash. These words made the Yanjing general's heart slightly cold and angry. In a cold voice he said, "This is the court's order. Are you going to defy it?" Jingge did not reply. After he finished the conversation that needed to be carried out, he reminded, "Don't think about making a detour into Dongyi. I don't want to cross the mountains to seize your weapons." After saying this, he pulled on the reins of his horse and returned to the solemn Black Knights. The metal spear hanging horizontally by his saddle shone with a cold light. The Yanjing general took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. Narrowing his eyes, he observed the Black Knights close at hand. After looking for a moment, he had to admit that the other party's equipment was far superior to his. Looking at the weight of the equipment, he knew that the quality of the individual soldiers and the quality of the war horses were far above that of the Yanjing generals. Although there were only 1,000 people, it was easier said than done to charge in with as little blood as possible when faced with 1,000 killing gods. The true confrontation between the Yanjing camp and the Black Knights entered the third day. It was also the fifth day Governor Wang had calculated. There were occasional small scuffles between the two sides. The Yanjing side's desire for battle and anger had already surged. Although the Black Knights were few in number, they were still unusually cold and not excited. It was a time of mutual hostility. Governor Wang also felt that he could not endure it any longer. He had to teach the Black Knights a lesson. Because of the Emperor's edict, waiting for 5 days was already giving Fan Xian and the Great Prince enough time to react. If the Yanjing side continued to maintain the situation of confrontation and were unable to enter Dongyi, the Emperor and Jingde would probably be unusually angry. Just as Wang Jikuan was preparing to sign the military order to forcefully enter the Nyoto Mountain front line and launch an attack on the Black Knights, a general suddenly held a battle report with a serious expression and quickly rushed into the governor's manor. Wang Jikuan narrowed his eyes as he read the contents of the battle report. His heart felt a chill. He had not thought that Fan Xian would actually be able to create a variable in the north of the Qing kingdom. Furthermore, this variable was one that he had never thought of. He knew that his army could be pulled back. He had not disobeyed the emperor's edict and had not allowed civil war to erupt within his jurisdiction. This should have been a wonderful thing. For some reason, there was not a glimmer of calmness in Wang Jikuan's eyes. They were filled with worry. The military report came from the northern camp in Sangzhou. It clearly said that Shang Shanhu, who had been resting in Shangjing in northern Qi, had suddenly returned to the border. Leading 100,000 soldiers, he headed straight for the southern front. He was already 70 li north of Sangzhou. Today is the last day of 2008. Originally, I had some feelings. Later, I thought about it and decided to leave it for next month, when the Qing year ends, to chat with everyone. I just wish everyone a happy new year, truly happy. Those who still have monthly votes, please vote. Don't waste it. This is the last month. I want to look a bit more glorious. Tomorrow, I hear that the monthly votes have doubled. I hesitate. Chapter 723. It was late autumn, and the wind began to pick up. The cold air whistled down from the extreme north, sweeping past the wastelands of the North Sea and the endless North Sea Lake to the north of Sangzhou. Sangzhou was at the northern end of the Qing kingdom. It was the closest city to northern Qi. Purely based on geography, it should be southeast of Shangjing. However, because the cold wind followed the North Sea every year and traveled south, this place was even colder than Shangjing. The autumn trees around them had already lost all their leaves, and the fields below the city were busy harvesting their only harvest at the end of summer. Now the fields had turned into stubble after stubble, and were covered with a layer of frost, looking very pitiful. It had already snowed a few times. Passing the Qing kingdom fields, The hills in the distance were still covered in snow. It looked very quiet. On the snowy plains, one could faintly see many black dots and northern Qi flags fluttering in the snowy wind. A general on the walls of Tsangzhou narrowed his eyes and looked in that direction. The scouts had long reported back that the northern Qi army heading south covered the sky and covered the earth. It was impossible to tell how many there were. It was probably the entire strength of the northern Qi army in the south. The northern Qi people had come. The Tsangzhou guards were not very afraid. Although the enemy was powerful, they still did not feel a glimmer of fear. During these 20 years, the two sides had fought countless battles, and the northern Qi people had never gained any advantage. Even though the northern Qi general Shang Shanhu had been moved out of the northern gate by the northern Qi emperor and had come to the south, he had not been able to advance a single step through the Qing army's tight defenses. The only thing that worried the Tsangzhou general was the man called Shang Shanhu. Since 20 years ago, after the Qing emperor no longer personally led troops, the only person in the world who could truly be called a god of war was probably this general Shang Shanhu. This was the glory he had obtained through his years of bloody battles with the barbarians in the north. These few years, the northern Qi army's morale and equipment were clearly far inferior to the Qing kingdoms, but they were still able to maintain a balanced situation in the Tsangzhou area. It was all because of this person called Shang Shanhu. He used soldiers like a god, and was skilled in the art of splitting and thrusting. He did not truly exhaust all of his strength, but he managed to exhaust the Qing kingdom's two border armies here. After years of small conflicts and friction, both sides strictly guarded their borders and did not carry out any truly large military movements. In the eyes of the Qing kingdom, they were only making preparations and stockpiling rations and military equipment, waiting for the emperor's final order to send out troops. The emperor was still tidying up the court. The Qing kingdom's vanguard army was also waiting. They had not expected that before they could attack, northern Qi would come first. Based on previous years' practice, once autumn came, the two sides would stop harassing and probing each other. General Shang Shanhu would be summoned back to Shangjing for his annual vacation. Why had he suddenly returned from Shangjing this year? The ground slowly began to shake. The sound of the shaking was not loud, and the sound was not very shocking. The black lines on the distant snowy hills gradually drew closer in the direction of Tsangzhou. As the distance grew closer and closer, in the eyes of the soldiers on Tsangzhou, the countless black lines and the dark cloud-like military formation were gradually broken down into sections of military camps and into specific people. Wearing armor and holding knives and spears, the northern Qi soldiers with faces full of solemnity. The soldiers on Tsangzhou even felt that they could clearly see the frost on the northern Qi people's eyebrows and their pale hands holding long spears. A tense and oppressive atmosphere quickly spread through Tsangzhou. Immediately after, it was accompanied by the low shouts of the officers. Messengers holding banners hurried back and forth between the dozen corner towers on the city walls. The Tsangzhou defending general put down the telescope the palace treasury had made in his eyes. His brows were furrowed deeply. He said to himself, "What exactly do these northern Qi people want to do?" The temperature on the top of the city walls was very low. The words he spoke immediately turned into mist and shrouded his face. Just like the densely packed northern Qi army and horses in the distance outside Tsangzhou, it hid the truth and made countless people feel confused. The defending general slowly gripped the hilt of the sword at his waist. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the northern Qi people with astonishing power below the snowy hills in the distance. It was as if he wanted to see through their true intentions. Did they really want to move south en masse? The defending general did not believe this because he believed that Shang Shanhu, a famous general of a generation, would not be so foolish. No matter how skillful the northern Qi generals were at using troops, they would not mobilize so many people to directly attack the Qing kingdom in the bitter cold of the end of autumn. This was a suicidal method. Attack the city? The Qing kingdom soldiers also did not believe it. Although the northern Qi army that had appeared outside Tsangzhou had an astonishing power and was estimated to be 40,000 people, they did not have enough siege weapons. What did they have to take down Tsangzhou? There were 20,000 elite soldiers inside Sangzhou, waiting with their spears at the ready. "General, the northern Qi people have already penetrated deep into the country," an officer beside the Sangzhou defending general reminded him. His brows twitched a little. It was clear he was angry at Sangzhou's inaction. They watched as the northern Qi army invaded the country, yet the northern camp did not react at all. The Qing kingdom had not endured such humiliation in many years. The Sangzhou defending general did not have any reaction. He knew that his conservative response these 2 days had already made many proud Qing kingdom generals angry. However, he knew he was facing Shang Shanhu. Particularly, the northern Qi military's sudden movement that came without warning like snowflakes made him very wary. He could not guess what the other party wanted to do. The northern Qi and southern soldiers split into 3 groups. Using great speed, they broke through the border between the 2 countries and invaded the area controlled by the Qing kingdom's northern camp. This was a large movement the northern Qi people had not made in 20 years. Yet before this, neither the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council nor the military's own intelligence network had caught a whiff of it. Northern Qi's 100,000-strong army had forcefully entered the country. It appeared to be a powerful force, but it was impossible for them to directly break through to the south. However, every military operation always had a purpose. So, what was the purpose of Shang Shanhu's shocking action? There were 20,000 soldiers inside Sangzhou, while the northern camp's powerful strength was scattered among the 4 camps with Sangzhou as the center. In front of the city, the 40,000 northern Qi and southern soldiers were aggressive, but they had split up and entered deep into the Qing kingdom's territory. Was the other party not worried that the northern camp would move troops from all over to surround them? It was late autumn, cold and heavy with dew. Northern Qi's lone army was advancing far away. There would certainly be major problems with logistics. As long as Sangzhou was sealed and Shang Shanhu was drawn into attack, the 4 camps of the northern camp would quietly surround them. Other than rushing to retreat, what other choice did these 40,000 northern Qi and southern soldiers have? They couldn't get any benefits at all, yet they had to move so many soldiers and use up so much rations and energy. What exactly did Shang Shanhu want to do? The Sangzhou defending general's brows were furrowed tightly. Looking at the northern Qi people, who had already begun to set up camp in the distance, he sank into deep thought. He completely ignored the angry expressions of his subordinates. It was already the 5th day. Northern Qi's largest military operation in 20 years was unexpectedly met with the Qing kingdom's most patient response. The Sangzhou defending general sealed the city and did not come out. The various camps of the northern camp only waited solemnly as they watched the northern Qi people step onto their land. However, they did not make any strong reactions. This was not in line with the Qing kingdom's pride and blood. Even the northern Qi soldiers, who were silently crossing the Qing kingdom's border and waiting at all times for a bloody battle with the Qing kingdom's army on the battlefield, felt a glimmer of surprise and strangeness. In a small city about 60 li from the border between the 2 countries, the headquarters of Northern Qi's military operation was set up there. In a private house that had been requisitioned in the city, charcoal was burning in a brazier. The red on the inside seeped through the layer of silver ash on the outside, filling the entire room with the warmth of spring. However, the high-ranking Northern Qi generals in the room were not warming themselves by the fire. They stood by a table and looked worriedly at the flattened military map of the south on the table. Occasionally, they would glance at the person sitting in the grand armchair. Shang Shanhu sat in the grand armchair with his eyes slightly closed. It was as if he was deep in thought or deep sleep. Suddenly, he slowly opened his eyes and asked, "It's been 5 days since the 3 roads entered the country. Has there been any movement from Sangzhou?" The voice of Northern Qi's foremost general was not loud, but it was deep and powerful. "Commander, Sangzhou is still locked in," a general replied respectfully. Following commander's orders, the 3 roads of troops have not gone deep, other than the one in Sangzhou. Who would have thought that our counterparts in the south would be more patient than in previous years? Shang Shanhu stood up expressionlessly and walked to the side of the long table. Pointing at a certain point on the map, he said, However, the Qing people are all proud and arrogant. Furthermore, this is a proper battle and cannot use tricks. The Zhangzhou defending general can at most hold out for another 2 days. It is impossible for him to wait for Jingdo's edict to arrive. He must go out to battle. Otherwise, he will not be able to explain himself to the Qing court. What if they remain locked in the city and refuse to come out? Shang Shanhu's trusted general asked worriedly. This time, we've used all of our strength. If the other party holds out for another 2 days, the 4 military camps of the northern camp will see through the truth of the other 2 roads and directly surround them. If we don't receive them in time, we'll probably suffer heavy losses. Not only did the generals of the Qing kingdom's northern camp not see through the truth of the northern Qi military's sudden movement, even the northern Qi people themselves didn't know why they were suddenly sending out troops. Furthermore, they were braving the bitter cold and such a large risk to go deep into Qing territory. Although this was indeed very satisfying, as soldiers, they wanted actual results and not to pay thousands, or even tens of thousands of lives, just to walk in front of the other party's city and flaunt their might. Perhaps only the emperor in the northern Qi royal palace in Shangjing and the silent general Shang Shanhu knew the inside story of sending out troops this time. But who in this world dared to ask them? Although we've been on the defensive these years, don't think of the Qing army as too terrifying. Shang Shanhu's palm landed steadily on the map. The Qing kingdom's northern camp uses Zhangzhou as the center. 5 days have already passed, and the other 4 roads of the northern camp have not come to reinforce them. It can be said that they have been stopped by our 2 roads of troops. It also means that the northern camp currently lacks a backbone. A disinterested smile rose to Shang Shanhu's face. The Qing kingdom's equipment and military power are far above ours. If Yan Xiaoyi was still alive 5 days ago, he would have given the order to abandon the other 2 gaps, surround Zhangzhou, and swallow up my 40,000 soldiers. However, in the northern camp, who would give such a risky military order? Yan Xiaoyi died and Shi Fei came. Although that General Shi is not as good as Governor Yan, he is still a powerful figure. The Qing emperor was worried about him and moved him to the Jingdo garrison. Shang Shanhu smiled coldly and said, "Back then, the northern camp participated in the rebellion. The Qing emperor had many misgivings. How do the generals of the northern camp still have the ferocity and arrogance they once had under Yan Xiaoyi's hands? These years, the Qing kingdom appears to have been accumulating national power in preparation to invade the Qi kingdom. In reality, they have been harming their own national power, particularly in the northern camp. The Qing emperor is a remarkable figure. However, the remarkable figures under his command have died one after another." Shang Shanhu sighed as if he felt it was boring. "Since it is so, if my 100,000 soldiers go in and take a look, who can stop me? Being conservative is their best choice, but also their worst choice. It's also the choice they have no choice but to make. However, that clever Zhangzhou general probably won't be able to suppress the northern camp's desire to counterattack for long. That is why it will be in 2 days." After Shang Shanhu said this, he walked out of the room, leaving behind the generals looking at each other. The wind and snow had risen outside the room. The snowflakes were not big, but they were fragmented and irritating. Shang Shanhu narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the busy soldiers and logistics officials in the city. A complicated emotion rose to his face. He thought of the emperor in Shangjing, and the last time the emperor had urgently summoned him to the palace and ordered him to send out troops at all costs to help Dongyi stabilize. The vanguard of the northern camp was to attract the border army in Yanjing to come to their aid and help Dongyi temporarily relieve the pressure. A chill flashed through Shang Shanhu's eyes. He thought to himself, even if that noble in the south was truly going to turn against the Qing emperor, was it really worth it for northern Qi to pay such a large price? Regardless of whether it was worth it or not, northern Qi would still have to pay a price for this military operation. Just as Shang Shanhu had analyzed, on the 6th day of the battle, the Qing military finally made a valiant response. 2 paths of elite soldiers in the northern camp formed a crab pincer and leaped toward Zhangzhou. The other 2 camps sent out all of their troops, Braving the light snow falling from the sky, they charged toward the other two paths of Northern Qi's army that had just entered the country. In just one day 3 fires were lit. The wastelands in the north of the land immediately became a battlefield of slaughter. Riders charged, bowstrings strummed, arrows flew through the sky, and spears pierced through the wilderness. Fresh blood flowed, flames could be seen everywhere, and corpses lay in the filthy blood. The sounds of killing shot into the dark clouds in the sky. This piece of land, which had been silent for many years, finally became lively because of the Northern Qi army's brazen attack. The curtains were pulled back on the battlefield, where hundreds of thousands of lives had been entangled. Everyone fought together with great vigor. However, this curtain was quickly pulled back by Shang Shanhu. Without a trace of blood on his body, the Cangzhou defending general walked out of the city under the protection of a large group of trusted soldiers. He watched coldly from the side as his subordinates cleaned up the battlefield. He looked at the arrows stuck deep into the withered trees and listened to the wretched cries of the wounded. His expression did not change at all. As a soldier, it was natural for him to fight for the emperor. However, there was always a chill in his heart that he could not get rid of. Even the joy of a Pyrrhic victory could not dilute it. After a night of forceful marching, the 2 reinforcements of the Qing army's northern camp finally formed an encirclement with the main garrison outside Cangzhou. Before they had time to rest for a moment, they suddenly realized that the Northern Qi army seemed to show signs of leaving. The Qing army was mighty. How could they allow the enemy to wander within their borders and then leave so casually? An attack that was not fully prepared began. Fortunately, the border soldiers of the northern camp had fought for many years. The Qing kingdom's military power was very powerful. Thus, such a hurried attack was able to maintain a powerful force of attack. However, the northern Qi elites that Shang Shanhu had personally trained were not easy to deal with. After a large battle, the Northern Qi army still maintained their formation perfectly after throwing down over 1,000 bodies. Using an unimaginable speed, they left the front line of the battlefield and valiantly threw down a few camps to abandon, not giving the Qing border soldiers any chance to give chase. This battle, no, it should be said that this strange battle had ended. The Qing kingdom had the geographical advantage, and the advantage they already had, so they obtained victory. However, this victory did not achieve the results they had predicted. The Northern Qi people ran too quickly. Looking at the captured supplies and rations, the Cangzhou garrison general narrowed his eyes and felt a glimmer of coldness. He finally understood why he had not seen the Northern Qi people's siege weapons at the beginning. Even if it was a trap, the other party should have at least brought a ladder. It turned out that from the very beginning, the other party was only prepared to fight a battle and then run. They did not bring any heavy supplies that were difficult to carry, and the entire army went into battle with light equipment. No wonder they did not collapse after the last encounter, and ran like rabbits. Why did they run? The highest-ranking general on the Cangzhou side once again sank into deep thought. He knew he was not a match for Shang Shanhu. If he could truly understand Shang Shanhu's thoughts and have a clear target, he would not be as scared as he was right now after winning a battle. The next day, shocking battle reports came from the other 2 battlefields. The 2 groups of Northern Qi elites had not gone far into the territory. At the same time that the Qing army outside Cangzhou carried out a combined attack, the rest of the northern camp's military power also went out at the same time and killed their way toward the enemy camp on the border. However, the 2 groups of Northern Qi elites ran even faster. All of the generals of the northern camp became cautious. They didn't know what the famous Northern Qi general was planning. Thus, they forcefully restrained their subordinates and didn't allow the Qing Iron Riders to use the momentum of the counterattack to kill their way into Northern Qi's territory. On the 3rd day, a piece of bad news came. The 40,000 Northern Qi elite troops that had escaped from the encirclement outside Cangzhou, on their way back into Northern Qi territory, strangely passed through to the east and entered Dongyi's Song Kingdom territory. They occupied a provincial city on the Song border. It was said that the troops in the Song Kingdom's provincial city did not put up any resistance. Dongyi also did not have any reaction. Thus, they allowed the 40,000 elite troops to enter the provincial city. This city appeared unremarkable and almost abandoned. In the past, no power had noticed this place. Now that Shang Shanhu had led his troops into the city, a large red dot appeared on the map. When the Qing military opened their eyes to take a look, they were shocked to find that this city happened to be right in the middle of the northern camp in Yanjing. It was like a fishbone that pierced all of the Qing soldiers and made them feel very uncomfortable. Was this Shang Shanhu's true intention? In the Battle of Zhangzhou, Northern Qi had lost and the Qing kingdom had won. It appeared so, but was this strange battle going to end just like that? After another dozen days, the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council and the military's intelligence system simultaneously sent intelligence reports to the various generals in the northern camp. After the Northern Qi army of 100,000 pulled back into the country, they did not retreat and rest. Instead, they began to set up camp in the same place. Furthermore, from the depths of Northern Qi's vast country, they began to send all kinds of supplies toward the south in an endless stream. A storm was brewing. This was clearly the sign of a decisive battle. Additionally, Shang Shanhu had taken the unremarkable provincial city. The Qing military immediately became cautious. Without waiting for Jingdo's edict to arrive, they had already begun to make preparations to welcome the true battle. The battle might be next spring? In Yanjing, Commander Wang Jikuan was also forced to pull his attention back from Nyoto Mountain and turn it to the 40,000 Northern Qi soldiers above his head. He furrowed his brows tightly. He was furious in his heart. He had never thought that the variable Fan Xian had used would-be collusion with the Northern Qi people. Immediately after, Jingdo's edict arrived and passed into the hands of the high-ranking generals in Yanjing and the northern camp. No one knew what the Qing emperor said in the edict. After the edict, the Qing kingdom's military power in the north began to rest, lie dormant and calm. Immediately after, the master of Dongyi, Yin Jilan, sent a message to the world. He expressed the strongest protest and anger toward the Northern Qi people's brazen invasion. He said that Dongyi would stand by the side of the Qing emperor and would deal the most violent and destructive blows to all invaders. The most terrifying 13 disciples of the Sword Hut in Dongyi suddenly disappeared without a trace. No one knew where they had gone. Receiving the news, the defenses of Shang Shanhu's camp in the provincial city immediately tightened. Just as the chaos in the north of the mainland was gradually rising, the Northern Qi royal palace was peaceful. Imperial consort Li, who was greatly favored by the emperor, looked at the emperor lying lazily on the couch. Biting her lip, she quietly said, "Dongyi has been saved for Fan Xian. The emperor has paid such a high price. I really don't know what he can give to thank you." "Thank me?" The Northern Qi emperor laughed coldly and gently rubbed his stomach. "That shameless person who is full of evil tricks, but always considers himself a saint, will probably curse me in my manner for rashly starting a war." Chapter 724. Jean Daudu climbed up from the couch. Sea Lily helped him put on a gray-black cloak. Walking to the door of the palace, he looked at the snowflakes drifting down outside. The highest ruler of Northern Qi sank into deep thought. Northern Qi inherited the Wei kingdom and liked black, green, and other solemn colors. This 1,000-year-old palace built against the mountain was like this. The clothing he wore today was basically these two colors. His bare feet were wrapped in warm velvet shoes. He didn't know if they were warm. Snowflakes drifted past his slightly narrowed eyes and landed on the quiet ground. This palace was deep in the royal palace, and not far from the Empress Dowager's palace. It was also not far from the little pavilion behind the mountain. It was very quiet. Without the emperor's permission, no random person was allowed to come close. There were very few eunuchs and serving girls serving to the left and right of this palace. They were all old servants that the Empress Dowager had brought up, so there was no need to worry about Northern Qi's greatest secret being leaked. Even in such a safe situation, the Northern Qi emperor still held her hands behind her back and stared calmly into the snow. There was not a glimmer of weakness. Perhaps for her, dressing as a man had long been something that she did not need to put her heart into or hide. Rather, She had long seen herself as a man and emperor. This kind of aura had long seeped into her flesh and blood, and could not be separated. After Chen Pingping's death, there are only 3 people left in this world who have the right to place their pieces. A complicated expression reappeared on her face. The weather was slightly cold, and her cheeks were slightly red. However, there was no flirtatious feeling. On the contrary, there was a sense of killing. I had not thought that Chen Pingping would play such a game in the end. The Northern Qi Emperor's brows furrowed. She let out a breath of cold air and said, "Only now do I understand why the imperial advisor cared so much about Chen Pingping's life before he died. He had long seen that if he wanted to force Fan Xian and his cheap father to turn against each other, only Chen Pingping would make the final choice. I don't understand why Chen Pingping would do this. What kind of hatred could make him do this?" She laughed coldly. "Presumably, it has something to do with that woman from back then." Sea Lily slowly walked to her side and glanced at her worriedly. She handed over the small heater in her hand and quietly asked, "Does Fan Xian's list of 3 people also include him?" She was the granddaughter of the previous king of the Qing kingdom. Presently, she was the only favored imperial consort Li in the Northern Qi royal palace. Her relationship with the Northern Qi emperor was closer than many people had guessed. They were partners, companions who had grown up together, and people they confided in. Earlier, the Qi emperor had said that after Chen Pingping's death, there were only 3 people who had the right to place their pieces. And Ping, Fan. The Northern Qi emperor gently stroked the slightly hot stove inside. He has a good mother, and is hard on himself to have the power he has today. Don't underestimate his power. There are good things hidden in Dongyi. I the Qi gently the Qi the Li the Fan the emperor, he, the Qi the Fan the Fan, dynasty Fan Li and Long I the A Fan the Yin he A Fan E the Fan the Northern Qi emperor faintly said. Just this alone proves that the power in Fan Xian's hands makes even the Qing emperor afraid. It's so cold. Don't stand at the door to the palace. Sea Lily carefully looked at the emperor's expression. From the corner of her eyes, she imperceptibly brushed across his abdomen wrapped in a large cloak. The emperor was an intelligent and sensitive person. He immediately sensed her gaze. A glimmer of disgust immediately rose to his face. His cheeks tightened slightly. It was as if he was tightly gritting his teeth and suppressing his anger. Seeing the emperor's expression, Sea Lily snorted and couldn't resist laughing out loud. "I wonder what Sir Fan Jr. would think if he knew of your Majesty's current situation. That bastard is ruthless and powerful, but in his bones he is a rotten scholar." The Northern Qi emperor was merciless as he harshly criticized the man in the south. With a cold smile he said, "How naive, childish and muddle-headed the things he has done these few months. The situation has already developed to this point, yet he still hopes to resolve the problem within the Qing kingdom. He still wants fewer people to die, so that this matter can come to an end. In the end, he has underestimated the Qing emperor. Even if his old emperor is not a great grandmaster, how can his little tricks shake his position? He wants fewer people to die, so that he can change the dynasty? This is truly preposterous to the extreme." The Northern Qi emperor's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not listen to Sea Lily's words. Leaving the palace door where the wind and snow had just begun to rise, he coldly said, "If I don't help him this time, Dongyi and the Yinjing camp will face off. Regardless of who wins or loses, I want to see how he will continue to pretend to be a wealthy and idle person in Jingdo. Does your Majesty truly only want to help him defend Dongyi?" Sea Lily's eyes shifted slightly as she asked quietly. The Northern Qi emperor's body froze slightly. It was as if he had not expected Sea Lily to see through his other plans at a glance. After a moment of silence he said, "I am the master of Northern Qi. How can I harm my Qi army because of a man? Helping him is actually helping myself. If the Qing kingdom does not fall into chaos, the pressure on the Qi kingdom will be too great. Besides, the Qing emperor has always had thoughts of invading the north. Now that General Shang Shanhu is guarding the south, he will first test the waters, and then control the center. With preparations, it will always be easier in the future. I'm just a bit worried about Shang Shanhu," Sea Lily replied with lowered brows. These words were not something a concubine in the back palace could say. However, as noble consort Li many times, she was more or less like the Northern Qi Emperor's strategist. The foreign enemy is powerful. Even if Shang Shanhu holds a grudge against me for working together with Fan Xian to kill Xiaoan. The Northern Qi Emperor furrowed his brows slightly. As long as the Qing kingdom does not give up on invading the north, General Shang Shanhu will not forget the world because of a personal grudge. I am like this, and so is General Shang Shanhu. However, Sir Fan Jr. is already in a difficult situation in the south. Once the people of the Qing court see that General Shang Shanhu has sent out troops this time, and the connection to Dongyi, a glimmer of worry flashed between Si Lily's brows. She involuntarily began to worry for Fan Xian. Of the 3 women in Shangjing who had connections to Fan Xian, Haiting Duoduo was far away on the grasslands. The emperor in the palace was scheming and cold and emotionless. He probably didn't care much about Fan Xian's life or death. However, Si Lily couldn't help but worry about the man who was sometimes warm and sometimes cold. I have never worried that the Southerners would see the true purpose of the South trip this time. This cannot be hidden for long. At least, those who know the true state of the Qing court, and Dongyi will certainly be able to guess, the Northern Qi Emperor said coldly. Yanjing's Wang Jikuan will certainly be the first to guess. What is there to be afraid of guessing? Even if it gets out, there is no need to be afraid. Colluding with the Qi kingdom is a crime that even Fan Xian cannot bear. Hearing this, Si Lily couldn't help but sigh faintly. So, Your Majesty has never given up on forcing him to come to Shangjing. However, if it really reaches that step, will he be able to come back alive? The wind and snow chilled people and made their faces flush red. The Northern Qi Emperor looked at the wind and snow calmly and slowly said, "If he is alive but refuses to come, for me and for you, what difference is there from him being dead? Duoduo shouldn't know of this matter." Si Lily raised her head and looked at her. Aunt Disciple is on the grasslands, and the people in Shiliang Road have all died. It is not convenient to contact her. The Northern Qi Emperor lowered his head and looked at the tips of his feet. He was silent for a long time. His right hand suddenly rose and trembled slightly. It was as if he wanted to touch his abdomen. However, he didn't do this action for a long time. His fingertips curled up slightly. Finally, a glimmer of a feminine expression appeared. "Your Majesty, the military report has arrived. The officials are waiting in the closed pavilion." Outside the palace, an old eunuch urgently reported in a raspy voice. The South was currently at war with the Qing people. The military situation was tense. No one dared to make a mistake. For the first time, the Northern Qi people discovered that their army had finally bravely launched the first attack. Their mood was much different than before. Hearing these words, the Northern Qi Emperor abruptly raised his head. The glimmer of gentleness in his eyes had long turned into a cold calm. Si Lily quickly tied a gold and jade belt around the waist of her large black robe. She walked toward the outside of the palace. Her footsteps were steady, and she displayed the bearing of an emperor. Leaving the depths of the palace, Sir Lang Tiao and Friar He were already waiting quietly outside. In the 10th year of the Qing calendar, Dongyi submitted to the Qing kingdom in name. The situation of the world was about to undergo an irreversible change. However, a rain in Jingdo at the beginning of autumn pulled the situation back. Regardless of whether or not Fan Xian, who was in the middle of the whirlpool, had such deep and far-sighted plans, at least the present Dongyi was, in reality, under his and the great prince's control. It had to be said that it was only at this moment that Sigajian's final order truly displayed its greatest effect. Of the 13 disciples of the Sword Hut, other than Yun Jilan, who had become the master of Dongyi, the other 12, as well as the aces of the grandson generation, had all gathered under Fan Xian's command. Additionally, there were the 10,000 elite soldiers led by the Qing kingdom's great prince, and the 4,000 black knights Qin Pingping had left for Fan Xian. As long as Fan Xian and the great prince worked together smoothly, Dongyi would once again become an independent power. Regardless of how one looked at it, the trust and cooperation between Fan Xian and the great prince would not be broken so easily. This had already been well demonstrated during the Jingdo Rebellion 3 years ago. After Sigejian's death, Dongyi maintained its independence. Presumably, this great grandmaster's spirit would also be pleased after his death. Other than Dongyi's own power, the key to achieving the present situation was the Northern Qi military's sudden autumn attack in the 10th year of the Qing calendar. This attack had caused the Northern Qi court to lose a great deal of power and rations. In the end, Shang Shanhu's miraculous hands had only coincidentally obtained a provincial city in the corner. It looked like the Northern Qi people had lost more than they gained. Immediately after, Northern Qi moved out and made it appear as if they were heading south in full force, forcing the Qing kingdom to prepare with all its might. A great battle seemed to be about to erupt next spring. This gave Dongyi and Fan Xian at least half a year of buffer time. Regardless of how the Northern Qi emperor, disguised as a man, hid her inner thoughts in front of Sea Lily, and only put the interests of the Northern Qi court and people at the forefront, she could not convince herself otherwise. Everything she had done was largely because of that man in the Qing kingdom. He had competed with her for a number of years, cooperated with her for a number of years, and fought for a number of years. In the end, he had become her first and only man. When the news of the battle in the north reached Jingdo, it was already the beginning of winter. This year, Jingdo's weather was unusual. The autumn rain was even heavier. It was as if all the moisture in the sky had been pushed down. After winter, there were no clouds in the sky. It was bleak and cold, but there was no snow. Without the Overwatch Council, Baowa Brothel's intelligence reports were, after all, marginal information. Fan Xian did not know the true inside story of the battle in the north. However, this did not stop him from analyzing it and coming to a conclusion close to the truth. Different from what Zhang Daodu had expected, the eruption of the battle did not make Fan Xian angry. In the end, he was not a true saint. He was just a normal person. He knew that the female emperor in the north was helping him, so it was difficult for him to be angry. He was just a bit gloomy. The reason for the gloominess between his brows was complicated. Perhaps it was because he had discovered that he had no way of influencing the thoughts of the Northern Qi royal family. Even if he had their greatest weakness, she was in the end an emperor. She would have her own thoughts. Another reason was the attitude of the palace after this matter. Northern Qi invading, then retreating, not withdrawing, and preparing for war. These 4 consecutive attacks were all to help Dongyi take some of the pressure off. Any major figure with sharp eyes could see this. Thus, some people also understood Fan Xian's role in all of this. Although not many people understood this, and it did not affect the discussions among the Qing people, the silence in the royal palace still caught Fan Xian by surprise. The major figures in the Qing kingdom were shocked by Fan Xian's influence, and that he was able to have Northern Qi send out troops to help, such as Duke Lu, who rarely came to the manor a few days ago. That night, Lady Lu's father, Duke Lu, who had been silent in court for many years, but still had some power, spoke sincerely and earnestly with Fan Xian for an entire night. He was Lady Lu's biological father, and could be considered Fan Xian's ancestor. Fan Xian had always been respectful to Duke Lane in the capital. Although this duke rarely left the manor, at critical moments, he always stood on Fan Xian's side. Although Fan Xian was silent in the face of his lecture, he did not refute it. As a soldier of the Qing kingdom, Duke Lu was shocked and fearful of the faint connection between the battle in the north and the Fan Manor. However, the matter could not be made clear, so the old man only came to the manor to warn Fan Xian and remind him. Even someone like Duke Lu, who did not care about worldly affairs, was beginning to fear the role Fan Xian might play. Why was the palace still so calm? Fan Xian did not believe that the emperor would be shocked by the strange changes in the north. He also did not believe that even if his powerful Northern Qi aide was exposed in front of the emperor would feel some fear. The emperor needed a battle. How could he be afraid of Northern Qi's invasion? However, this kind of quietness and silence was indeed unusual. The cold air gradually condensed. Jingdo's first snow finally floated down. The beginning of winter coincided with the winter solstice. Dumplings began to be cooked in large pots in various private residences in Jingdo. The business of slaughtering sheep in various shops was extremely good. The delicious taste of mutton soup seemed to rise from every corner of the streets. Prince Hutchings Manor, which had been silent for a long time, opened its main doors wide. Honored guests had arrived, but it was still unable to be lively. The people who came were always the same. The imperial soldiers responsible for guarding outside Prince Hutchings' manor watched the activity in various places with vigilant gazes. The purpose of these imperial soldiers was, to a greater extent, to guard this manor. The matter of the great prince defying the emperor's will and not returning to the capital had not been made public. Only a few officials in court knew that a prince leading an army outside had disobeyed an edict. This matter was extremely disgraceful. However, for the face of the court and the Li royal family, the court temporarily maintained its silence while the Yanjing camp was unable to enter Dongyi. No one was willing to relax their guard on Prince Hutchings' manor. Fan Xian held Shunning's small hand and walked into Prince Hutchings' manor with a face full of smiles. He walked side by side with Wang Fei toward the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Once Lin Wan'er entered the manor, she was pulled away by Yi Ling. No one knew what this pair of close friends were going to talk about. Sir Fan Jr. truly always has astonishing actions. Prince Hutchings' face was without might. She was only tranquil. Presently, she was like a hostage, and did not leave the manor for many years. Today was the rare winter solstice. Yet, she had invited these young people, in the most delicate situations in Jingdo. Fan Xian his wife, Yi Ling Princess Rojia, Prince Hutchings Wang Fei, and secondary Fei Wang Tonger. This was already most of the people in the Qing royal family. Other than the third prince deep in the palace, the younger generation of the Li royal family had all gathered in the manor. Unfortunately, these young people's situations were not good. The great princess must be joking, Fan Xian replied evenly. If we are talking about the matter outside Songzhou, I think you should know better than me that the young emperor in the north is not someone I can move. Wang Fei looked at him with a complicated expression and faintly said, "It is precisely because I know my brother's personality that I don't understand how you were able to persuade him to send troops to help you. I think there is no need to bring this matter up," Fan Xian replied with a smile. Fan Xian smiled and replied, "At least it is a good thing for the great prince far away in Dongyi. However, Wang Fei, you are alone in Jingdo. If there is anything inconvenient, please tell me." Wang Fei smiled slightly and bowed solemnly. Although the present situation was unpredictable, she knew that she had once made a mistake. She could not make such a mistake again. Her husband and the young man in front of her were already tied together in Dongyi. The Yanjing camp is pointing its sword at Dongyi. I wonder how Wang Tong feels in the manor? Fan Xian saw that Shunning by his side could not walk anymore. He picked her up and asked Wang Fei. The little girl did not understand what the elders were talking about. She opened her large eyes curiously and looked back and forth between Fan Xian's and Wang Fei's faces. Although Tonger's personality is a bit arrogant, she is, in reality, a naive and unaffected child. She just finds it a bit boring. Sometimes, when I ask her to go to the Yi Manor, she is overjoyed. She had thought of going to the Fan Manor to have a look. As you know, it is not convenient. I understand. Fan Xian smiled slightly and looked at Wang Fei. At the beginning, I had thought that with Wang Fei in the manor, the young lady of the Wang family would not have any problems. This is all because of you. Oh right, Ma Suasua still does not have a status. She is getting older. A glimmer of sadness flashed through Wang Fei's brows. The great prince was far away in Dongyi, far away, fighting against the court as an equal. Her life as a hostage in Jingdo was wretched. Yet, there was still a childlike secondary Fei in the manor, as well as a naturally outspoken girl who did not understand the ways of the world. It made it difficult for her. Fan Xian sighed and said, "How can I care about these things now? Although it was I, the official of Taichung Temple, who made this up, you and I both know that in the end, it was only the emperor's will." Having said this, it was pointless to say more. Coincidentally, the two of them had already crossed the wooden bridge over the lake and reached the center of the pavilion. The sides of the pavilion were all glass windows that let in the light, but not the wind. There were a few heaters, and the air was like spring, making one feel comfortable. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the four girls talking together in the corner of the pavilion. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. One winter solstice, Fan Xian was summoned into the palace as the princess's son-in-law. Under the Empress Dowager's icy gaze, he ate a meal of mutton soup without much interest. It seemed that it was still that year when the great prince opened the manor to entertain guests. It was in this pavilion that, other than the crown prince, all of the young people of the Li royal family had come. The second prince had also come. Now the Empress Dowager was dead, the second prince was dead, the crown prince was dead, and those who should have died and those who should not have died were all dead. There was only Fan Xian locked in Jingdo, the great prince separated from Dongyi, the third prince isolated in the palace, and these 5 girls. All of his descendants were secretly standing on the opposite side of him. Did he really think that he had it easy? Fan Xian couldn't help but think of the emperor in the palace. He stood in a daze at the entrance to the pavilion and was silent for a moment. The hot pot was sent in. Everyone ate the meal in silence, probably thinking of something in their hearts. Fan Xian sat by Rojia's side, like a warm and amiable older brother. He asked about her well-being and helped her boil the mutton in her bowl. Of the girls in the pavilion, Rojia was probably the weakest and most pitiful. Although there were rumors in the palace that Prince Jing would return to his manor in a few days, thinking of a girl who had endured alone in Prince Jing's manor for months, Fan Xian couldn't help but feel pity for her. Without the servants in the pavilion, everyone spoke more casually. Even Wang Tong-er, who was cautious and unfamiliar with interest in her eyes, did not feel left out. Fan Xian rose to go to the corner of the pavilion to pick up some charcoal. From the corner of his eye, he saw Yi Ling follow him. "I know you care for Wang Tong-er," Fan Xian said quietly as he stood and gazed at her. What would Wang Chang'er's future end be? Would she become a young widow like Yi Ling? No one knew. Yi Ling sighed. She was no longer the charming girl who rode through the streets of Jingdo. "Teacher, are you just going to keep messing around with the emperor like this?" Fan Xian was silent for a moment. He then said, "You're killing me with your questions. However, I'm afraid the emperor doesn't even have me in his eyes. In a few days, perhaps there will be news from the west. Help me ask around and see if there are any movements in the Bureau of Military Affairs. Father will not let me interfere in matters of politics. I'm not Sun Pinner." Yi Ling glared at him. Shortly after, her expression darkened slightly. "I don't know what you're doing. I just want to give you a piece of advice. P.S. Let's just say a few words. I'm still sick, dizzy, and uncomfortable. However, after finding out that I was third in last year's monthly votes ranking, I naturally became happy. I have to thank everyone, because this is the monthly votes that everyone cast. Thank you so much. Also, I must thank Third Young Master Tang. A long time ago, Third Young Master Tang reminded me about the annual rankings. That's why I've been working hard to get votes since July, and thanks to everyone's love and help, I've managed to get into the top 3. Top 3, right? If I'm wrong, then I've really dropped a lot. I heard that third place is the Australian and Singapore duo. I want to ask thee about this and see if I can get a discount." Chapter 725. The things that need to be said have already been said by many people. There's no need to say anything more. Fan Xian smiled and patted Yi Ling's shoulder. Between the two of them, there was never anything to worry about. Yi Ling did not raise her brows out of habit. On the contrary, the expression on her face dimmed slightly. "There are always discussions in the family that burrow into my ears. Although I don't want to hear these things, Father is very angry about what happened in the north." She looked at Fan Xian, wanting to say something but then stopped. A moment later, she said seriously, "After all, you and I are both Qing people." Fan Xian nodded and didn't say anything, but his smile was slightly bitter. After the member of the Qinian unit he had sent to Dongyi met with Mu Feng, he passed on his will, causing the turmoil in the Liang kingdom to reignite. From there, he thought of a way to resist the court's edict and allow the great prince to stay in Dongyi. However, Northern Qi's reaction was truly beyond Fan Xian's expectations. Calculating the time, Wang Qinian should have just arrived in Shangjing. In the message he had him bring, there was no intention for Northern Qi to send out a large number of troops. He only asked the little emperor to help Dongyi for the sake of their relationship. There were many ways to help. Northern Qi's method was, without question, the most open and honorable. It was also the kind that put Fan Xian in the most awkward position. He broke free from his thoughts. As he picked at the coal, he quietly chatted with Yi Linger. He wanted to understand from the bits and pieces of conversation, in the Yi manner, whether or not there was any movement from the Bureau of Military Affairs. The emperor's reaction to the northern battle was too indifferent. It was so indifferent that Fan Xian smelled a glimmer of danger. However, he didn't know where this scent landed. A few days after the winter solstice, the Fan Manor held another family banquet. This time, the family banquet was not like Prince Huching's manor, where the younger generation of the royal family were invited. It was a pure family banquet. Other than the master of the manor, the only guests were Fan Xian's 4 disciples. Yang Wanli had been thrown into prison from his position as vice minister of the Ministry of Works. He had received heavy punishment in prison. After the Supreme Court's verdict, he had been taken back to the manor by Fan Xian to recover. Even now it was difficult for him to move. The resentful expression on his face had long faded. He just sat quietly to the right. Of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, the one who climbed the fastest was Cheng Jialin. He had already become the Suzhou Zhizhou. Now that he had been implicated by Fan Xian, he had also tragically fallen from power. The 2 great crimes the palace had given him of visiting prostitutes and invading the mausoleum were truly too severe. He was forcefully taken back to the capital. During this month, Fan Xian had rushed back and forth for him. He had exhausted a great deal of energy. Finally, he had saved his life, but he had also lost his position. It seemed that he had no future. Cheng Jialin sat below Yang Wanli listlessly, sighing and sighing. There were 2 tables in the flower hall. The women were all at the table behind the screen. Only Fan Xian and Yang Qing sat at the table outside. They did not move their chopsticks. They were waiting for someone. There were 2 tables in the flower hall. The women were all at the table behind the screen. Only Fan Xian and Yang Qing sat at the table outside. They did not move their chopsticks. They were waiting for someone. Outside the flower hall, snowflakes floated lightly in the Fan Manor's garden, waiting for the people who had returned. It was Shi Chanli, who had left the Qing kingdom these years to carry out Fan Xian's will and unify the brothels under the sky. Shi Chanli entered the hall. He didn't even brush off the snow on his body before he first bowed deeply to Fan Xian in the main seat. He then bowed to his teacher's wife through the screen. Only then did he turn around. Looking at Yang Wanli and Cheng Jialin, he laughed bitterly and went forward to hug these 2 friends he hadn't seen in a long time. Presently, he and Sang Wen were in charge of Baoyue brothel together, so he knew most of the news under heaven. He also knew of the tragic encounters these 2 friends had had in the past few months. Everything needed no words. Just a hug was enough to express the feelings of separation and comfort. You're not feeling well, so don't get up. Shi Chanli very consciously sat below Cheng Jialin and spoke to Yang Wanli, who was about to get up and speak. Although he was now one of the wealthiest merchants in the world and could be considered a hero no matter where he was, the habits he had developed from wholeheartedly studying the books of sages had not changed. In particular, the regret in the depths of his heart made him naturally envious of the experiences of Yang Wanli, Cheng Jialin and Hou Jichang. He also thought that as a merchant, he should sit at the very bottom. Yang Wanli and Cheng Jialin met each other's eyes and smiled bitterly. They couldn't be bothered with this pedantic fellow. They turned their heads and chatted idly. No one talked about their tragic encounters these few months. No one went to criticize the court wantonly because they didn't want their teacher, Fan Xian, to worry about these things. After waiting for a while, no one came again. The expressions of the people at the table began to become awkward and ugly. Cheng Jialin looked at Fan Xian's slightly focused expression and muttered, "Perhaps it's because the snow is heavy, and they were delayed on the road." Yang Wanli pressed his lips tightly together and sighed. He picked up the wine cup in front of him and drained it in one gulp. Shi Chanli glanced at Fan Xian with confusion and said, "According to the news I received, Jicheng should have returned to the capital 7 days ago. However, the court did not convict him, and just let him be." Fan Xian raised his brows and smiled. "It is the end of the year. Many officials and colleagues have banquets and invitations. It is normal for them to not be able to come in time." Although he said this, he still couldn't help but feel gloomy. Ho Jicheng had returned to the capital a few days ago, but he had not come to Fan Manor to visit. The spies in the court had also gotten wind of this. It seemed that the palace had no intention of punishing him. All of this already made it clear. In such a country, betraying one's teacher for glory was not unheard of. However, Fan Xian still did not feel good in his heart when it happened to him. His gaze slowly swept across the faces of the 3 people at the table. A complicated emotion rose in his heart. Shi Chanli was originally still in the Song Kingdom. This time, he had taken the risk to come back to the capital to see him. There was no need to mention Yang Wanli. Fan Xian had always thought that Cheng Jialan, who had already become the Suzhou Zhizhou, had a weak personality and was not very trustworthy. Unexpectedly, he would rather have his position taken away than betray him. Unexpectedly, Ho Jicheng did not come. "I heard that Scholar He's Manor is also holding a banquet today." Shi Chanli's expression was a bit ugly. Before you came to the capital, the 2 of them were known as the leading scholars of Jingdou, and once had some personal friendship. Yang Wanli gritted his teeth and said in a dark and angry voice, "What a Jicheng! He abandoned darkness for light quickly. When I see him another day, I must give him a good sigh of praise." These words were sarcasm. Cheng Jialan could only smile bitterly. A moment later, he sighed faintly and said, "Back in the Tongfu Inn, Jicheng told me that even when Sir Fan Jr. was walking, he should not notice the rainwater on his umbrella dripping into the oil pan of the peddlers. Such a person who loved the people was the one we should follow. Who would have thought that he After a sigh, Fan Xian smiled. Calling for the 3 of them to start eating, he said, "Everyone has their own aspirations. Besides, I am unable to work in court. Jicheng wants to work for the people. It is normal for him to be closer to Scholar He." His words were calm. No one could see the coldness in his heart. Fan Xian actually knew that of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, the one he had favored the most was Ho Jicheng. However, the affairs of the world were strange. He didn't know if something had gone wrong with Fan Xian's arrangements, or if it was a matter of luck. Of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Yang Wanli had done a meritorious service in repairing the dikes. Cheng Jialan had sat in the position of Suzhou Zhizhou at a young age. He was also one of the 7 gentlemen of the New Deal that the emperor had personally summoned into the palace. Although Shi Chanli had not entered officialdom, his identity as the owner of Baiyue brothel was glorious. Only Ho Jicheng remained in Jiaozhou and was unable to fulfill the ambitions in his heart. Now that Fan Xian had lost all power, Sir Ho was probably dissatisfied and was forced to find other ways. It was not that Fan Xian did not understand this. He was just unhappy, particularly unhappy at Scholar He, who was also holding a banquet. After 3 rounds of wine, they chatted about the things they had done in their positions these years. Yang Wanli talked about how the shining white silver had become the huge rocks and earth on either side of the Yangtze River. Cheng Jialan talked about how he had protected the border and people as Zhizhou, how he had used Sir Fan Jr.'s help to take care of the salt merchants and royal merchants, how he had helped his teacher's wife raise money to enter the Hangzhou conference, and how many poor commoners he had helped. Shi Chanli smiled as he talked about what he had seen and heard under heaven, as well as the slightly better lives of the miserable women in the brothels. He also told an interesting story. It was said that in the back of some Baiyue brothels, there was a statue of Sir Fan Jr. worshipping Sir Fan Jr. because he had protected the lives and safety of many girls. After these words were said, everyone other than Shi Chanli spat out their wine. Although the 3 of them were chatting about their own matters, they were all related to Fan Xian. They talked about some of the things Fan Xian had done in his life that were beneficial to the country and the people. Fan Xian was not a saint. He was only a mortal, so he was a bit happier. He smiled and looked at the three of them. After a moment he said, Wanli has been living in the manor these days. In any case, he doesn't have a proper home in Jingdo. Jialin, your family is still in Suzhou, so you might as well move into the manor. Once their teacher spoke, the three of them fell silent at the same time. They put down the chopsticks in their hands and looked at him. I have made arrangements for the Suzhou family matters. Don't worry. Fan Xian looked at Qing Jialin and said warmly, just get through this period of time. I called you here today because I was afraid that you would have resentment toward the court and me and harm yourselves. He laughed bitterly and said, of course, looking at it now, I don't need to worry about Jichang's side. But you know that I don't ask anything of you except for those 8 words. So even if the imperial court wants to find evidence of my crimes from you, it's impossible. Jichang has his own considerations, but I don't think he will betray me out of nothing. Fan Xian's expression calmed. He slowly said, the 4 of you followed me to be officials under heaven. That was a time of peace, so I needed your efforts. Presently, the world is not at peace, so I needed you to endure silently. I know you want to help me, so I have privately gone to find some colleagues I am on good terms with. In the future, don't do this. My matters are not problems that the officials of the court can solve. Qing Jialin smiled bitterly and agreed. They all remembered clearly the 8 words Fan Xian had left them when they had been sent out. Be good people and be good officials. Since I can't be an official, then be an honest person. There was a hidden pain between Fan Xian's brows. The emperor had knocked everyone by his side into the dust. He had truly made him look left and right, and was badly battered. This move was truly too vicious. After the family banquet, Yang Wanli and Qing Jialin went to the residence in the back garden to rest. Fan Xian left Shi Chanli behind. He had traveled thousands of miles to summon Shi Chanli back to the capital not for something as simple as a meal. There were only the 2 of them left in the study. Shi Chanli no longer had to hide anything. He angrily cursed Ho Jichang. Fan Xian shook his head and said, in the end, Jichang is only a scholar and an official. Even though he has just learned to curry favor, how could he know that he has made a big mistake? Shi Chanli's heart chilled. He knew too many of his teacher's secrets. He knew that his teacher was not just a simple powerful official. His teacher's power was beyond his position of power. Ho Jichang's betrayal had, in reality, angered a ruler in the dark. Don't worry that I will kill him. I don't have the leisure to do that. Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly. How is the matter I had you investigate? There are no abnormalities in Dongyi or the north. There is no conflict with the flames of war on the surface, Shi Chanli added. He then replied seriously to Fan Xian's question. The matter of Gong Dian leaving the capital is indeed strange. The Bureau of Military Affairs sent a transfer order to Nanzhao 2 months ago. However, the level of secrecy is very high. The tower has only gotten wind of it. Without the cooperation of the council, a lot of the information can only be touched on the surface. Nanzhao? What's wrong there? Fan Xian furrowed his brows and asked. Commander Ye's son is on the front lines in Nanzhao. According to court practice, there is currently no fighting in Nanzhao. The new master has already succeeded the throne for 3 years. That border army should be halfway back to the capital to report. Shi Chanli glanced at him and continued. Based on the time, they should have already arrived in Jingdo to see the emperor, and then returned to the various camps. However, that border army still has not arrived. You mean they might have gone west? Fan Xian's heart jumped. He suddenly thought of a terrifying possibility. He shook his head and said, how could such a large movement of military power be hidden from everyone? If we had focused our attention on the south at the beginning, even if it was the southern front of Weizhou, with Wu Mei's help, perhaps we would have been able to find some movement, Shi Chanli said with self-blame. However, Baohua Brothel has been paying attention to Jingdo, Dongyi, and northern Qi these few months. We haven't sorted through the intelligence reports there carefully enough. It has nothing to do with you. That's what I'm focusing on. Fan Xian rubbed his temples with a headache and said to himself, Yi Linger's brother. That bastard is not in Jingdo for a long time. I'd forgotten there was such a person. Based on the time, If the Nanzhao border army had truly turned back and passed Jingdo without entering, if they had truly gone west, wouldn't they have already reached Dingzhou? Fan Xian raised his head and took a deep breath. His eyes were filled with unease and tiredness. He knew he had made a big mistake. However, he had been under house arrest in Jingdo, and the Overwatch Council was under Yan Bingyun's watch. It was indeed impossible to accurately grasp the movements of the Qing kingdom's military power just by relying on Baoyue brothel. Gong Dian left the capital and went to Dingzhou to summon Crown Prince Hongqing back to the capital. He took with him 10,000 Jingdo garrison and 2,000 imperial soldiers, Shi Chanli reminded him. This is something that was discovered earlier. I know that. A feeling of defeat rose in Fan Xian's heart. His palm gently slapped the desk inside. I just did not think that the emperor would be so generous. He actually moved troops from the far south and crossed thousands of li. The army changed defenses. Is he not afraid that the world will fall into chaos? Hearing these words, Shi Chanli's body froze. He forced himself to calm down and analyze. For the court, the new Nanzhao ruler is young, and there are many powerful officials in the country who are inclined toward the Qing kingdom. There is no need to be on guard. It is enough to leave half of the army in the south. As for Yanjing and the northern camp's situation in dealing with northern Qi and Dongyi, although it looks like it is because of the aftermath of the rebellion and the fact that the northern camp does not have a commander, in reality, there is no danger. Thus, for the emperor, as long as he can pacify Xiliang, and there is no more cause for chaos, he can fully prepare for the northern expedition. To pacify Xiliang, we have to deal with the people on the grasslands. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and sighed gently. He knew that he had been completely calculated by the emperor. In the end, he had not escaped the emperor's grasp. An indescribable sense of tiredness and disappointment filled his body. It made him sit woodenly in the chair, unable to move. He finally knew why the emperor maintained such an indifferent attitude toward the battle in the north. He was not angry or wary at all because of the possible collusion between Northern Qi and Fan Xian. The emperor had long sorted out the possible actions of his illegitimate child, and had focused all of his attention and power on the west. The emperor did not dance with Fan Xian's plans. On the contrary, he took advantage of the situation and smashed his fist viciously toward Dingzhou. We must immediately inform the crown prince, Shi Chanli said with a pale expression. Fan Xian sat tiredly in the chair. A moment later he said, "It's too late." A chill pervaded the grasslands in winter. The wind came from the north and passed through the North Sea, carrying with it some moisture. It had long been wiped clean in the barren deserts to the northeast of the grasslands. It was dry and cold. The autumn grass on the ground had long disappeared. What was left was only sand and frozen earth that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was so hard that even the hooves of the horses felt uncomfortable. If it had been a winter in the past, birds looking down from the sky might have been able to find some moving and alluring green beside some lakes. Today they couldn't even find these pitiful habitats. The eyes of these cold-resistant birds, who did not want to go to the south for the winter, were completely red. The frozen and dried grass was blood red. The round gravel was blood red. The sand that crumbled with a pinch was blood red. Even the bodies of the voles that crawled out of their caves seemed to be blood red. This was the mouth of Hong Mountain, a place one had to pass to enter the Qing territory from the grasslands. The mountain rocks were all red. However, the red today was not a strange color bestowed by the heavens. It was dyed red by the Hu people on the grasslands and the Qing soldiers. There were corpses and fresh blood everywhere. The earth-shaking battle cries that had startled the voles out of their caves and startled the birds into the sky had gradually stopped. However, cruel battles were still going on beside some barren hills. Some stubbornly resisting Hu tribe warriors had gathered into a few small circles. Under the siege of the Qing soldiers, who outnumbered them 10-1, they shed the last of their blood. A year ago, the Dingzhou general, King Jing's heir, Li Hongqing, had received the Black Knights and Fan Xian, who had escaped from the grasslands at the mouth of Hong Mountain. At the time, he had hoped to be able to carry out a beautiful ambush here. However, the Hu people were not stupid. They never gave the Qing army such an opportunity. If it had been in the past, in such a cold season, the countless tribes of Shi, who would have followed the banner of the king's tent and slowly avoided the cold air. They would have advanced deeper into the grasslands until they reached the foot of the mountain that could not be climbed. After they had endured the bitter cold of this year, they would once again cover the grasslands in the early spring of the second year. She who rarely chose to launch an attack on the Qing kingdom's Shiliang road in the middle of winter. In the past, other than tribes that had lost power in the fighting on the grasslands, and would crazily try to cross the border to steal the winter rations of the Qing kingdom's soldiers and civilians, there had never been a major military operation. This year was different. For some reason, Sir Hugo, who had inherited most of the left virtuous prince's cattle and sheep warriors, suddenly led his tribe to the east and bravely, or rather recklessly, launched an attack on Qing kingdom's territory. What confused the Shihu people even more was that the great chief, the far-sighted chief, expressed his approval of Hu Ji's actions after thinking for a day and night in the king's tent. He then braved the bitter cold to send out the most elite grasslands iron riders in an attempt to pass through the mouth of Hong Mountain, go around Qingzhou, and directly attack the interior of Shiliang. No one would have thought that in the wilderness near the mouth of Hong Mountain, there would be 20,000 Qing iron riders and 70,000 Dingzhou soldiers lying in ambush. These Qing soldiers seemed to have long known the direction of the Hu people's attack on the grasslands, the number of people attacking, and the time of the attack. Most terrifyingly, they had predicted that Shi Hu would brave the bitter cold to attack this year. The Hu people's attack was completely unreasonable, and the Qing army's ambush was even more unreasonable. When these unreasonable things were put together, they created the great Qingzhou victory that would be recorded in the history books. This was a battlefield where tens of thousands of people sacrificed their lives. The side of a barren hill was already filled with corpses. Fresh blood flowed through the sand. This group of Hu tribe warriors had fought to the last man and were surrounded by the Qing army. From the earlier battle, the Qing military officer knew that this person was one of the few aces on the grasslands. Thus, he stopped urging his subordinates forward. Instead, he slowly raised his right hand and coldly prepared to shoot. "Are you surrendering or not?" A cold voice echoed through the cold grasslands air. Hugo, covered in wounds, breathed heavily. His eyes were bloodshot as he glared at the Qing soldiers. Suddenly, he let out a loud cry and stabbed his knife into his chest, so deep that the hilt disappeared. Hugo died, but his eyes were still open, looking hatefully at the sky. Even if he died, he would become a resentful spirit and ask the young man in Jingdo, who had caused all of this without reason and bloodshed, why? Why was all of this? Chapter 726. In the cold sky, an eagle was flying. It was not afraid of the arrows of the humans below. Fearlessly it glided down. Gliding across the battlefield that stretched for several li, it clearly saw the bodies of the Hu tribe soldiers who had died under the enemy's knives, spears, and crossbows. The fresh blood that gradually seeped into the sand and red earth, as well as the stimulating smell of iron and blood. The Qing army that had set up an ambush at the mouth of Hong Mountain began to clean up the battlefield and organize their formations. Even the most elite Dingzhou army had paid a heavy price in a great battle with the grassland's main force. The eagle flapped its wings and flew a little higher. Then, it was alarmed to discover that a group of Qing light cavalry had silently attacked from the direction of the Shitahai meadow in the northeast. There were at least 4,000 people in this group. Following the natural rise and fall of the sand dunes and meadow, they silently advanced into the depths of the grasslands. A strange cry was heard as the goshawk seemed to have sensed the cavalry's killing intent and fearsome aura, so it flew higher into the cold clouds. After flying for an unknown period of time, it finally broke through the clouds and zoomed toward a small hill beside a lake. There were thousands of grasslands, Shihu soldiers on this small hill. Mixed among them were some northern warriors who had moved from the snowy plains in the north. However, this group of soldiers were clearly people who had escaped with great difficulty from the battle at the mouth of Hong Mountain earlier. Their morale was very low, and many of them were already injured. Chief Subita's lips were dry, but there was no blood on his body. He looked coldly in the direction of the mouth of Hong Mountain in the distance. He knew that the Dingzhou army there was reorganizing, and would not be able to rush over in a short amount of time. Presumably, the Qing people would not go deep into the grasslands in pursuit. He glanced at the warriors of the court around him. Seeing the injuries on their bodies, he thought of the great battle at the entrance of Hong Mountain. His eyes grew cold. Once the grasslands entered winter, they rarely used soldiers. This was something that Shihu and the Qing kingdom were already used to. The biggest reason was that the weather was cold, and the ground was frozen. They had no supplies, so it was difficult for the Hu people to use their methods of coming and going like the wind and leaving like lightning. This winter, the chief had listened to Hu Ji's suggestion and gathered the most elite knights in his hands to begin an attack on Shiliang Road. It appeared to be an unwise choice, particularly with the wretched situation at hand. It seemed to further prove this point. But who was Chief Subida? 30 years ago, the Chanyu royal court, which was declining day by day, produced a person like him. He was able to survive and grow stronger in the cracks between the left and right virtuous princes, and he wisely accepted the barbarian cavaliers from the snow and ice in the north. He broadened his mind and absorbed the people from the central plains into his court. If it weren't for this era, if the eastern continent didn't have so many outstanding people, Chief Subida would have undoubtedly grown into a wise ruler of the grasslands, a figure whose might shook the world. How could he make such a low-level mistake? Subida's gaze pierced through the hill and landed on the Hu woman on the horse at the top of the hill. His expression became extremely complicated and downcast. Chief Subida had his own way of thinking as to why he had chosen to take the risk of attacking Shiliang Road in the cold of winter. He knew that the Qing court was currently in internal chaos. The emperor and his most favored officials were in a cold war. As for Hu Gu, the corners of the chief's eyes narrowed slightly. Like an eagle, he gazed in the direction of the distant Hong Mountain Pass. He thought to himself that Hu Gu, who dared to betray the grasslands and collude with the Overwatch Council, should already be dead. What a stupid person! How many of those who came into contact with the Overwatch Council could live smoothly? In this year, the chief had already investigated what Hu Gu had relied on to rise up on the grasslands. Thus, he guessed why Hu Gu would choose such a winter to attack Shiliang Road. Chief Subida cared a great deal about the political rumors in Jingdou. With just a little calculation, he guessed that it must have something to do with Sir Fan Jr., who had lost power. The last time Fan Xian entered the grasslands, he had cleaned out most of the spies the grasslands had sent out. The power of the court had been severely damaged. In the end, Fan Xian had still managed to escape with a few hundred black knights right under the chief's nose. This reality made Subida feel endless humiliation, particularly each time he looked at Songji Xianling. This humiliation was even harder to bear. This winter, Hu Ji's fake attack on Shiliang Road was an opportunity for the chief. After a long conversation with Songji Xianling, he rejected the princess' suggestion for him to be cautious. Instead, he wanted to use this opportunity to beat Fan Xian at his own game. Using the momentum of Fan Xian, wanting to use foreign troops to help the position of the Dingzhou general, he gathered the power of the grasslands and attacked Shiliang decisively. This was a clever plan. Presumably, the Dingzhou general, Li Hongcheng, had also received Fan Xian's news and thought that Hu Gu was faking an attack. He would not have expected the chief to take advantage of the situation and launch a large-scale attack, catching them off guard. Who would have thought that there would be more than 100,000 Qing elite soldiers gathered around the mouth of Hong Mountain? This was a most shameless ambush. After this battle, Hu Gu had been ambushed and killed. The court and the right virtuous prince's troops had suffered heavy casualties. At least 20,000 strong grassland soldiers had lost their lives on the Red Earth. Thinking of the pain of the battle earlier, the chief's eyes narrowed even more, and his heart grew colder. He squeezed his horse's belly and came to Songji Xianling's side. In an icy voice he said, "You said that he was only borrowing the grassland soldiers to help Li Hongqing stabilize his position." Haiding Duoduo did not turn around. The fur coat on her body shivered in the cold wind. As the chief, such a risky gamble should never have been made. I have never truly trusted him. However, I think this time has nothing to do with him. He is just a pitiful pawn that has been killed by someone else. The two of them fell silent at the same time. To be able to clearly calculate Fan Xian's response, and the Hu people's strategy of beating them at their own game, and to have planned it long ago, resulting in a crushing defeat the grasslands had not experienced in 30 years, there could only be one person in the Qing kingdom with such great foresight and eyes on the world. In front of the Qing emperor, it seemed that all of the scheming were just the prelude to the killing move in his chess game. The eagle finally landed, and landed on Su Bida's cold outstretched arm. The sky was cold, and the ground was frozen. After flying in the cold clouds for a while, the animal shivered in the cold. The color of the feathers on its body appeared particularly dim. Su Bida's pupils constricted. In a low voice he said, "There are thousands of light riders coming from the northeast." He said in a cold voice, "The Qing people are planning something big this time. I don't know which general dared to send another powerful army deep into the grasslands after this battle. In such cold weather, do these Qing people still have the extravagant hope of capturing the court in one fell swoop?" Although he said this, the chief was still shocked at the valiance of the Qing army and the determination they displayed to destroy everything. Although there were still thousands of grassland men around the lake, they had just experienced a great battle and were tired and low. If they were to face the 4,000 light riders who had been accumulating power for a long time in a head-on charge, victory or defeat would be obvious. Su Bida viciously cursed the Qing people for being despicable. They did not give him any chance to rest. As a king, he did not allow his angry emotions to destroy his reason. In the first instant, he had already sent out a warning to his subordinates at the bottom of the hill. Immediately, the court warriors around the lake immediately began to move. They moved quickly. It was impossible to see their earlier injuries and low moods. "Are you going with me?" The chief turned his horse's head, and turned his head to glance at the Hu tribe woman on the hill. "I'm going to the Qing kingdom." Haiting Duoduo lowered her head slightly. Her eyes never left the mouth of Hong Mountain. Her expression was calm, but her voice revealed a glimmer of self-blame and self-reflection. She could see countless resentful spirits rising up in that direction. Because of Hu Ji's trust in a certain person, her trust in a certain person, and the chief's trust in her. Tens of thousands of soldiers on the grasslands had been surrounded by the Qing Iron Riders. There were heavy casualties. Broken limbs and heads littered the ground like dead wood in a rotting swamp. This hellish scene on the battlefield made even her heart waver involuntarily. Only in that moment did the present leader of Tianyi Dao realize that, among thousands of soldiers and horses, one person's power was actually very small and could not change anything. "I want an explanation. If I can't, I have to give you, as well as these people who died, an explanation." After Haiding finished speaking, she gently squeezed her horse's belly and turned into a streak of light smoke. Riding down the hill, she headed in the opposite direction of the sun. The words Fan Xian had asked Hong Yiqing to bring to her had already been delivered. Because of the matter between Xiliang and the grasslands, Haiding could not leave at the moment. At this moment, she had to go to Jingdo. Chief Su Bida didn't turn his head to look at the streak of dust again. With a stern cry, he led his remaining soldiers and advanced deeper into the grasslands. He believed that as long as he returned to his true home, the Qing light riders leaping at him like wolf cubs would no longer be a threat to him. In the west of the grasslands, of the 10,000 northern man iron riders, who only obeyed Songji Xianling, 7,000 were still alive and waiting for him. Compared to the strange battle in the north of the mainland, the battle in Xiliang Road between the Qing kingdom and the Hu people was, without a doubt, more far-reaching and important in history. The beginning of this battle was actually a series of orders Fan Xian had the Qinian unit send out in a small courtyard in Jingdo that had been bought for over 100 liang of silver. It was because of these orders that Hu Ge led the left virtuous prince's old subordinates and pretended to launch an attack against Xiliang Road. Chief Su Bida's hawk-like eyes saw the relationship between Hu Ge and the Overwatch Council's Fan Xian and took advantage of the situation to act. Unexpectedly, all of this was within the Dingzhou military's expectations. The large net at the mouth of Hong Mountain had reaped countless Hu lives. After this battle, the left virtuous prince's troops were completely wiped out. The court and right virtuous prince's troops suffered heavy losses and lost all their prestige. The various tribes on the grasslands began to grow restless. Chief Su Bida's budding ambition to establish a country, with the help of northern Qi's Tianyi Dao, Songji Xianling, was shattered. For decades, the grasslands would be in chaos. There would be no opportunity for unification. The great defeat of Shi Hu in this battle had far-reaching effects. History called it the Qingzhou Great Victory. Other than the battle at the mouth of Hong Mountain, there was another important reason for the endless unrest on the grasslands. It was the 4,000 light riders that had been discovered by the Eagle. A young general had planned the entire battle of the Dingzhou army, ambushing the elite Shi Hu troops. Furthermore, this general had abruptly left the battlefield at the mouth of Hong Mountain the moment the battle began. As the commander, he led the 4,000 light riders hidden in the east and launched a continuous half-year chase toward the remaining soldiers of the court. This chase was carried out in the ice and snow and galloped across the wasteland. Regardless of whether it was the pursuers or the deserters, they all lived unusually cruel lives. In the end, this chase had beaten Chief Su Bida until he lost all of his courage. No matter what, he was unable to make contact with the 7,000 northern man-iron riders scattered in the far west. Passing through winter, spring, wind, snow, and long grass, this jaw-dropping chase continued for 5 months. When the last remaining strength of the chief's court finally made contact with the last 7,000 iron riders Haiteng Duoduo had left on the grasslands, the brave and heroic Qing light riders finally withdrew from the grasslands. In the 5 months on the grasslands, this group of only 4,000 light riders burned, killed, and plundered along the way. They destroyed countless Hu tribes. Using iron-blooded methods and discipline, they maintained a difficult chase through the grasslands. By the time they returned to Qingzhou in the spring of the second year, there were only 800 of the 4,000 left. The commander of this group of iron riders, that had completely changed the situation in the west of the Qing kingdom, and completely dispelled any thoughts of Shi Hu invading the Central Plains, was actually the commander of the Qingzhou victory. As a high-ranking general, who should have been in the tent giving orders, he had bravely lowered his rank and entered the grasslands in pursuit. Other than the Qing emperor's meticulous planning, this young general was the truly powerful figure in the Qingzhou victory. Chief Su Bida's defeat at his hands was not undeserved at all. This young general was called Yi Wan. He was the eldest son of Commander Yi Zhong, head of the Bureau of Military Affairs in the Qing Kingdom, and the brother of second Wangfei Yiling. He was the person who had left the Dingzhou army at the age of 17 and gone to the front lines in Nanzhao. While Yi Wan was holding down the fort in Qingzhou and commanding the deployment of the battle at the mouth of Hong Mountain, killing the Hu people until they cried out for heaven and earth, the highest military commander in Shiliang Road in name, General Li Hongcheng, was under house arrest in the general's manor in Dingzhou. Also in the manor with him was Gong Dian, who had left his position as commander of the imperial army and had come to Dingzhou to take over. Military reports from Qingzhou flowed endlessly into the general's manor. Gong Dian and Li Hongqing sat on two sides, silently looking at the military reports and not saying a word. The troops entering battle near Qingzhou were basically the headquarters of the Dingzhou army in Shiliang Road. They were all border soldiers born and raised there. The Yi family had operated here for decades. Other than the great prince's expedition to the west, where he was still able to leave some influence, the Yi family was like the emperor of the Dingzhou army. Presently, the emperor had moved the eldest son of the Yi family back to Dingzhou to lead these old Dingzhou soldiers in a ferocious attack. Of course, there was no problem in cooperating. The half of the Nanzhao border army that made Fan Xian's heart tremble did not actually surge into Dingzhou as he had imagined. Instead, it stopped in the north of the Tsang Mountains to the west of Jingdou. Then it chose one of them to enter Dingzhou. There were not many of them, but it was enough to control the general's manor. The handover of military power in Dingzhou was not actually a handover of soldiers. It was just a handover of generals. The eldest son of the Yi Manor entered Dingzhou. With the cooperation of the imperial army and other powers led by Gong Dian, he easily took military power from Li Hongqing's hands. If everything had gone according to Fan Xian's plan, if there had not suddenly been a young general, Yi Wan, who used soldiers like a god and the Dingzhou army saw as their own, then when Hu Ge led his people to attack, Li Hongqing could have taken the opportunity to keep him in office for another year and a half. It was very quiet in the general's manor. After a long silence, Li Hongqing calmly said, "When it comes to marching and fighting, I am not as good as Yi Wan." Gong Dian raised his head and glanced at him. A moment later, he replied in a raspy voice, "Yi Wan grew up in the Dingzhou army. From the age of 3, he had practiced martial arts on horseback and controlled battle formations. However, he was impetuous in his youth. He resented his father forcefully suppressing his achievements, so he abandoned Dingzhou and joined Nanzhao. No wonder there is so little news of this person in the capital." Li Hongqing nodded. Gong Dian sighed and said, "Back then, Commander Yi suppressed his achievements because he was too young and had too much military service. He was afraid it would arouse fear." After all, the old Qin master's eldest son had died a violent death in the camp. Qin Heng was also not as good as him. Li Hongqing looked at the military report in front of him and shook his head. Commander Yi is well aware of the art of blending with the light. No wonder he was able to hide such an outstanding son for so long. The Dingzhou army's wish in this life is to pacify Shihu. Gong Dian was also a general from the Dingzhou army. He gazed at Li Hongqing and said, "It is only right and proper to be loyal to the emperor. Regardless of what the world thinks of the Dingzhou army, for the benefit of the emperor and the Qing kingdom, we are willing to do anything." Li Hongqing laughed bitterly. He knew these words were referring to Yi Ling, Er's marriage to the second prince. In the end, the Dingzhou army had changed sides during the Jingdou rebellion, giving the second prince the heaviest blow. "I don't know what Fan Xian has said to you in private, but if this time, he led in the enemy to invade just to protect your position as general." Gong Dian's eyes narrowed. Coldness surged. "I find Fan Xian's actions shameful." Li Hongqing raised his face and gazed calmly at Gong Dian. "Who do you think I am? Who is Fan Xian? Since I dared to have Hu Ge come, I have my ways. Even if Yi Wan hadn't come, do you think I would have let the Hu people take advantage of me? In the end, it is something that hasn't happened. There is still room to turn around," Gong Dian said. "I think the emperor must be extremely disappointed in Sir Fan Jr." He paused and then continued. "After the crown prince returns to Jingdou, please help me take a message to Sir Fan Jr. I have always admired him, but this time, I am somewhat disappointed. A man is born between heaven and earth. How can he use the blood of soldiers as a bargaining chip?" Li Hongqing took a deep breath and gazed at Gong Dian with a not-quite-there smile. After a moment of silence, he calmly said, "In the end, you still don't understand Fan Xian. If he was truly a person who built his success on tens of thousands of bones, if he truly did not care about the lives of Qing soldiers, then the Qing kingdom would probably have long become a tattered shirt riddled with holes. No matter how great and astute the emperor is, how could he stop him from ripping apart this shirt from the inside? You underestimate his ability. You also underestimate his character." Gong Dian was silent, but there was a faint chill in his heart. He didn't know that in front of the emperor, Sir Fan Jr. had already suffered a great injury. Could he still have the power to retaliate? Although the battle at the mouth of Hong Mountain was an ambush, they had faced tens of thousands of grasslands riders who were like wolves and tigers. The Qing court, or more accurately the Qing emperor, had put a great deal of effort into this. One secret edict removed Li Hongqing's military power. Another secret edict gave the eldest son of the Yi Manor, Yi Wan, full authority to command. As the saying goes, don't doubt the people you use and don't use the people you doubt. The emperor's confidence, or gamble, in that young general ultimately won a complete victory. Victory required a foundation in soldiers. In order to defeat the Hu people on the grasslands, all of the soldiers in the military camps inside and outside Dingzhou had been moved out. The entire Dingzhou army had gone out. adding on the Qingzhou army. Only then did they obtain such a result. Presently in Dingzhou, the group of soldiers Gong Dian had personally brought, as well as a small portion of the Nanzhao border soldiers Yuan had left behind, maintained order and peace. Li Hongqing silently returned to his manor and stared at the large map in a daze in his study. He then said to the guest who had been accompanying him the entire time, "I am about to return to Jingdou. I will send you out of Dingzhou. As for how you will escape in the future, that will depend on your ability." The guest was silent for a moment and then said, "I thank you on your behalf for your great kindness." This person was Fan Xian's trusted aide, Deng Ziyu. He was fully responsible for the matter of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council stationed in Shiliang. After the upheaval in Jingdou, Deng Ziyu had become a figure the court had to capture. No one had thought that he would be so daring as to hide in the general's manor. In the Qingzhou victory, other than the emperor's bright eyes and General Ye's godly use of troops, the Overwatch Council was also fully mobilized. Yan Bingyan has been in Dingzhou the entire time. Presumably Jingdou doesn't know. Deng Ziyu sighed and then said, "Sir Fan Jr.'s plans have all fallen into the emperor's calculations. Now that things have come to a head, I cannot betray the interests of the Qing kingdom and go inform those who people. I trust that Sir Fan Jr. and I also have the same thoughts." Li Hongqing was silent for a moment and then said, "I suddenly feel that Gong Dian's words are reasonable. No matter what Fan Xian does in the end, he is not the emperor's match. He is also unwilling to let the Qing people sink into a wretched situation. Since it is so, why bother?" You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.